Our story begins with Chao Chung, the owner of a local zoo that was, to be honest, on the very brink of collapse. However, everything changed when he posted a single video that caused the zoo to unexpectedly go viral. The reason was simple. His video featured two birds that seemed suspiciously intelligent, one of which was a cockatiel. Not only did it have a shockingly foul mouth, but it actually took delivery orders and flew off to complete them. The other was a raven leader who, with a single command, could send over 100 raven subordinates into the sky. They circled overhead like a dark storm cloud, creating an atmosphere that was, naturally, quite intimidating to witness. This spectacle earned Chao Chung several nicknames, including the Eagle Director and the Guardian of Young Spirits. After his parents' unexpected passing, he found himself forced to inherit this dilapidated zoo and all its problems. Along with it came tens of millions in debt, and while his parents were suffering, his so-called friends only made matters worse. Every employee eventually scattered, leaving only a kind woman and her young daughter who were willing to stay behind. Just as he was preparing to sell the zoo, a voice rang out. The system had detected a host from a cultivation world. His identity was now the holy son of the beast-taming sect, tasked with restoring a fallen sect to its former glory. The mission was clear: expand the sect, recruit new disciples, and breed spiritual beasts to ensure its future. By gaining fame and prestige through these actions, he could steadily increase the sect's overall reputation points. For every 10 points earned, he would receive a reward, and he realized, with a start, that he finally had a system. But he couldn't help but wonder why this system had mistaken his struggling zoo for a legendary cultivation sect. Perhaps expanding the sect simply meant upgrading the zoo's infrastructure, and recruiting disciples meant hiring new staff. Breeding spiritual beasts, he assumed, likely referred to increasing the number of wild animals through careful conservation. As for gaining prestige, that surely meant increasing the zoo's popularity, a theory he needed to verify immediately. He glanced at the beginner's gift pack within the system interface and silently gave the command to open it. He received the Holy Sun's beast taming technique, along with 3 spirit awakening pills and 3 beast spirit pills. The technique was an exclusive skill for the Holy Sun, while the awakening pills could optimize a beast's bloodline. They were designed to open a creature's mind and spirit, whereas the beast spirit pills drew spiritual energy into the body. This would strengthen their bones and overall health, and seeing these rewards, Chao Chung quickly formed a plan. He needed to learn the technique first. If he could truly tame beasts, he could make his animals perform incredible feats. With another livestream, he figured he could easily boost the sect's reputation points, which was quite a clever shortcut. The system allowed him to learn the technique instantly, even granting him temporary control over beasts he hadn't contracted yet. He could even borrow a contracted beast's power, so he began searching for the perfect animal to form a bond with. Since this dilapidated zoo had so few animals left, he found himself hesitating on which one to choose. Just then, a hanging parrot nearby started squawking "idiot, idiot" directly at him, which was, naturally, quite rude. Annoyed, he decided to contract the bird on the spot. If it dared to insult him, it could work off its debt. He told himself it was a fitting punishment, and the moment he fed it the pills, something incredible happened. The parrot's body suddenly doubled in size, and its feathers grew long and remarkably sturdy right before our eyes. Then, it spoke. "Master, I wasn't insulting you earlier. Those are just the only 2 words I knew how to say." The parrot desperately tried to explain itself through a mental link, even clumsily folding its wings as if bowing in apology. Chao Chung didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the sight. "You're quite sensible," he noted. "From now on, your name is Wency." "Thank you for the name, master." Wency chirped. "But my head is so itchy. Am I finally growing a brain?" The bird realized it could feel the spiritual energy now, sensing the very flow of the wind and realizing it could control it. We see the parrot take flight, circling about a meter above the ground as it tested its newfound abilities. The fallen leaves on the ground were suddenly swept up, swirling into small cyclones as the bird moved. A small tornado suddenly formed, propelling the parrot forward like a cannonball as it gained incredible speed. It soared from the ground, reaching dozens of meters in an instant while performing agile flips across the sky. As we watched the bird's remarkable agility, Chao Chung realized his own body was undergoing a strange transformation. He could feel the flow of the wind himself, sensing that every movement could now harness the air's breath. It seemed the Holy Sun's technique was working, allowing him to share the parrot's newfound wind-based abilities. He felt certain he could now sprint twice as fast as before, just as Wency dove back down toward him. The bird landed lightly on his shoulder, and Chao Chung told it they needed to earn some money together. 2 hours later, he used his last 5,000 yuan to buy an action camera and a network router. He strapped the gear onto the bird, telling it to prepare for its big performance. And meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, at a villa resort in Yunhai, a middle-aged woman realized her child had forgotten their medicine for school. The child had no keys, and she was stuck at work, leaving her with no choice but to call a delivery service. When no one accepted her order after several minutes, she frantically opened a social app to search for couriers. The first result that popped up, strangely enough, was actually a live streaming room. It was titled The Holy Son of the Beast Sect, featuring a beautiful parrot standing before a mirror. The bird was draped in filming equipment, and while the host stayed off camera, his voice could be heard clearly. He asked the viewers for follows, promising that for the price of one sunglasses gift, the bird would deliver anything. Any delivery request would be treated as an on-camera appearance, provided the user sent their address and a gift. He told them to simply private message the locations. Currently, there were only about 20 people watching. Most were skeptical, wondering if a bird could really deliver goods or if the host was just after their money. Just then, a user named Wealthy Blossom decided to take the risk and sent over the required gift. The person who sent the gift was indeed that middle-aged woman, though in her haste, she didn't bother with a private message. Instead, she frantically typed her address directly into the public chat for everyone to see. The comment section immediately erupted in a wave of excitement and anticipation. At that moment, we see the livestream camera fly out of the management office hall, circling once in the air. The lens suddenly tilted toward the sky, and a mere 15 seconds later, the view shifted back to the front. To everyone's shock, they were already 100 meters up, with half of Yunhai City visible below as the cyclone parrot took off. It streaked toward its destination so fast that the scenery below became a blur, a speed that left viewers utterly stunned. The chat was in disbelief, wondering if the host was serious and if a bird could truly find its way. One viewer noted that the distance from the zoo to the starting point was a staggering 11 kilometers. The video quality was a bit blurry, prompting viewers to tell the streamer to upgrade his gear. One even sent a gift before the goods had even arrived. A few special effect gifs floated across the screen just as a resort villa finally appeared in the frame. It had been less than 3 minutes. To cover 11 kilometers that quickly seemed almost impossible without some kind of trickery. Chao Cheng's voice rang out, telling the woman to find an open space near the southeast corner of the resort for the handoff. As soon as he spoke, the cyclone parrot performed a steep dive, heading straight for that exact corner of the villa. They spotted the woman jumping and waving her arms, and the bird executed a beautiful, sharp landing right in front of her. The woman was visibly delighted, confirming she was indeed the user Wealthy Blossom who had sent the gift. She held up a set of keys, and through the livestream, Chao Cheng gave his word that they would be delivered safely. As he spoke to her through the broadcast, she was so excited she wasn't even sure how to hand the keys to a parrot. With an air of quiet confidence, the bird simply reached out its talons and snatched the keys from her hand. Before she could even react, the bird soared back into the clouds, setting its sights on the Xingfu residential district. Covering 24 kilometers, the cyclone parrot intentionally slowed its pace, taking 9 minutes as the livestream audience grew in the blink of an eye. We see the viewer count hit 7,600 as the camera finally descends toward the Xingfu residential district. In front of Building 7, Unit 3, a girl is crouching on the ground, clutching her legs and sobbing. This was the person they were looking for. The woman confirmed this was indeed her daughter. Though the girl wasn't watching the stream, her mother had just called to explain the situation. She was still in a state of complete confusion when she looked up and saw a beautiful cyclone parrot hovering directly above her. The bird dropped the keys right to her, squawking, "Your mom. Keys. Your mom. Keys," which was, to be honest, a bit unexpected. The viewers in the chat were instantly amused. After all, while it sounded like the bird was swearing, it was technically telling the truth. Some wondered if the bird was a bit too divine. But then again, is a talking parrot really that rare in this world? In an instant, special effect gifs lit up the screen one after another, and the audience surged to over 20,000 people. Chao Cheng felt a bit speechless. The rewards were good, but he noticed his reputation points were rising far too slowly for his liking. He wondered if 10,000 viewers only granted a single point, while skeptics in the chat argued that this must be a drone-assisted hoax. They claimed no parrot could know so many words and insisted it was a recording, until the cyclone parrot took action a moment later. The bird flew directly toward the glass exterior of a nearby building, where the reflective surface provided a perfectly clear view. The reflection showed the cyclone parrot in all its glory, instantly silencing those who thought they had seen through a trick. A sudden hush fell over the chat, though a large portion of the crowd continued to insist it was just a high-tech drone. Their persistence, of course, was born out of nothing more than pure professional jealousy. Chao Cheng pushed through and finished his day of broadcasting, finally telling his brothers that the stream was coming to an end. He invited everyone to the Qinggan Zoo in North 3rd Ring Road for more ancestral training, promising to be back at 9 a.m. sharp. And with that final word, he reached out and abruptly cut the livestream feed. Immediately, a surge of exceptionally pure spiritual energy entered his body, settling deep within his sea of consciousness. As the energy expanded and finally merged with him, Chao Cheng felt an incredible sense of clarity and refreshment. With his body cleansed and his meridians flowing smoothly, we see him open the back end of the streaming app. The revenue had reached a staggering 178,000 yuan. After the platform's half in taxes, he finally withdrew the balance. Seeing 79,103 yuan, he marveled at the sum. It was no wonder everyone in society wanted to be an influencer these days. He then found Luo Jing and sent him a payment of 15,000 yuan for his hard work. He explained that 9,000 covered 3 months' salary, while the remaining 6,000 was a bonus for this month. Luo Jing didn't just take the money and run. Instead, he grew anxious, insisting it was far too much. Ultimately, Luo Jing had no choice but to accept and follow the plan, moving with his daughter into the zoo. They settled on the second floor of the management hall, right next to Chao Cheng's own room, where he finally sat down. With his cultivation increased, his physical functions and 5 senses had become significantly sharper than before. Suddenly, a series of bird cries drifted in from the window, prompting him to look down at the ground below. There, we see a struggling blackbird, a common raven, even larger than the spirit-fed cyclone parrot. As a protected species, these birds are formidable enough to fight and even prey upon other birds of prey. The raven initially showed hostility, struggling fiercely, until it felt the aura of the sacred beast taming art. It immediately calmed down as Chao Cheng examined its injuries, which were, to be honest, quite severe. A piece of its wing was shattered and its belly had been sliced by a blade. A day earlier, he couldn't have saved it. The bird was lucky. After using mystical medical skills to heal it, Chao Cheng activated his technique to form a bond. The raven became his second contracted spirit beast, and he gave it a new name, H1. A deep, thick voice echoed within his sea of consciousness, simply saying, "Yes, master." The next morning, vehicles began to arrive at the zoo, mostly local influencers looking to chase the trending story. Among the crowd was a debunking influencer with 1 million followers known as Brother Duck, holding his selfie stick high while live streaming. He shouted toward the zoo, demanding the god show himself, and before long, a figure emerged from the gates. Luo Jing came jogging out, looking quite dazed by the massive spectacle as he asked who they all were. Brother Duck raised his documents, declaring they were there to expose a fraud and demanding to see the so-called ancestral beast tamer. He specifically called out the man who used a drone to trick people yesterday, causing Luo Jing to frown immediately. He sensed trouble was brewing as Brother Duck told his viewers he was there to protect consumer rights on behalf of a fan. Yesterday, this fan had spent 2,600 yuan in the Chang'an Zoo livestream, but that donation had a catch. It was based on the belief that the content featured a real bird, when in reality, it was allegedly a high-tech drone. Citing Article 55 of the Civil Code, he accused them of consumer fraud, which, to be honest, was a very bold claim to make. He glared at Luo Jing, asking if he understood and demanding he bring the man out right this instant. Luo Jing was furious, telling him that if he suspected fraud, he should call the police instead of shouting at their gates. He knew perfectly well that Da Vinci, the cyclone parrot, was real. After all, they had just shared a meal together. When Luo Jing tried to explain that the bird was right there, Brother Duck snapped at him to shut up and just fetch his boss. He claimed not calling the police was an act of mercy, as he hated streamers who scammed their fans for money. Growing more agitated, Brother Duck kicked the fence with a loud thud, causing Luo Jing to startle and step back. Every influencer's camera was now fixed on the scene, sensing a violent conflict was about to erupt, but then, something changed. Above the park, a rolling dark cloud suddenly gathered, drifting slowly toward the gathered crowd at the gate. As it drew closer, we see that it wasn't a cloud at all, but a dense, swarming mass of black ravens. Beneath this living shadow, a young man approached with a large black raven perched on his left and a parrot on his right. As Chao Cheng drew near, the atmosphere shifted entirely, and the crowd fell into a sudden, stunned silence. Above, the swarm of ravens came to a halt, circling and descending around Chao Cheng in a scene that was as breathtaking as it was eerie. "Was it you who kicked the fence?" he asked, staring coldly at Brother Duck while demanding an answer. The entire area fell into a sudden, heavy silence as the large raven perched on his shoulder watched the crowd. It let out a single, hoarse croak, and immediately, the surrounding ravens joined in a collective cry that made everyone's skin crawl. Brother Duck took a deep breath and asked if he was the streamer for the Chang'an Zoo account, to which Chao Cheng simply confirmed he was. He claimed he was there to protect a fan's rights, accusing Chao Cheng of using false advertising to trick his audience. He argued that the 2,600 yuan donation was given under the impression that the birds shown were real animals. Since they were clearly bird-shaped drones, he claimed it was a violation of the law, though Chao Cheng remained entirely unfazed. In fact, he found the accusation almost amusing. With a slight tilt of his chin, Da Vinci immediately took flight from his shoulder. As the parrot landed on the front fence, the influencers behind Brother Duck surged forward, their cameras zooming in frantically. We see that this was indeed the same bird from yesterday's livestream, the one that had been admiring its own reflection in the glass. "Turn off the beauty filter," Da Vinci suddenly squawked, speaking clearly enough to startle everyone present. The crowd erupted into laughter, yet they were also deeply shocked by the bird's expanding and quite unexpected vocabulary. It was a divine bird. Anyone with eyes could see that this was certainly no high-tech drone. This was undeniably a living creature, just like the massive swarm of ravens that seemed to follow Chao Cheng's every command. When a man can train a murder of ravens like this, the idea of him using fake birds for a livestream becomes rather hard to believe. Brother Duck was now completely stunned. The evidence was right in front of him, and it looked nothing like a machine. He glanced down at his own livestream, noticing that his viewership had suddenly spiked to over 30,000 people. It was a bitter irony that his peak popularity was occurring at the exact moment his entire argument was falling apart. His face turned a deep shade of red as he shouted that it was impossible before a sudden, desperate idea flashed through his mind. "How can you prove this bird is the same one from yesterday?" Brother Duck shouted, claiming the livestream had used drones. He accused Chao Chung of using a real bird now just to fool them, wondering aloud if just anyone could be a streamer these days. At this point, the crowd of influencers turned on him, telling him to get lost and stop making a fool of himself. They mocked him for failing to distinguish right from wrong, accusing him of picking a fight without any real evidence. As more people joined in to kick him while he was down, Brother Duck found himself utterly speechless and humiliated. He prepared to leave in disgrace, but Chao Chung stopped him, reminding him that he had kicked the fence and frightened his staff. He demanded an apology before the man could leave, and suddenly, the entire murder of ravens let out a series of eerie cries. They took flight at once, looking like a massive dark cloud descending upon the crowd with overwhelming pressure. Everyone ducked in fear as the ravens swarmed and landed directly on the car Brother Duck had arrived in. The message was clear: if he didn't apologize, he wasn't going anywhere, a scene that left everyone present in total shock. Every camera was now fixed on these disciplined ravens, and across all the influencers' live streams, the comments began to flood in. The viewers were all saying the same thing, that this was what a real, formidable man looked like. They argued that since Chao Chung had cooperated with the challenge, Brother Duck couldn't just walk away after losing the fight. They praised Chao Chung as a true man and a good boss who acted with both strength and reason. Even Brother Duck's own livestream was filled with positive comments about Chao Chung, leaving the influencer absolutely fuming. If he didn't apologize, he would look uneducated and irresponsible, proving his rights activist persona was just an act. His public image would collapse, yet apologizing meant admitting he was foolish and unprofessional, losing all future trust. Knowing that a failed career awaited him either way, Brother Duck finally chose to offer a temporary, begrudging apology. He directed his words toward Luo Jin, who was stunned that Chao Chung would stand up for him over such a small matter. Deep down, Luo Jin felt a complex swirl of emotions, realizing his boss wouldn't let him suffer even a moment of injustice. The murder of ravens took flight with a thunderous roar, and Brother Duck slunk back to his car, disappearing in a cloud of dust. We see a crowd of influencers left behind, cameras still raised, as a heavy silence settled over the onlookers. Chao Chung dropped his cold expression and greeted the local bloggers, introducing himself as the owner of Chingon Zoo. He explained that he had just taken over the struggling business and was only using live streams to help it survive. He noted that while he cooperated with baseless accusations, he was far more interested in genuine, friendly interactions. With a smile, he invited the influencers to point their cameras at the Xianfeng parrot for a special demonstration. He promised a single, continuous shot to prove his innocence once and for all, leaving no room for doubt. Then, he formally invited the guests to enter the park and witness his ancestral animal training skills firsthand. The crowd agreed that with such talent, the zoo would surely thrive, all while keeping their lenses fixed on him. Chao Chung equipped the parrot with the livestream gear and began the broadcast, following the same format as the day before. The entire process of the local delivery was recorded by dozens of cameras, documenting everything from the earlier confrontation. From the dramatic arrival of the ravens to forcing an apology, the influencers captured every moment of the spectacle. This series of events, culminating in the uncut parrot livestream, quickly propelled Chao Chung onto the trending charts. For the first time, his viewers surpassed 50,000, and by the time the afternoon session began, the momentum was unstoppable. The popularity soon surged past 100,000, and shortly after starting, a system notification flashed before his eyes. His sect reputation had reached 30 points, rewarding him with 2 spirit link pills for the sight-sharing technique. This technique allowed him to ignore distance and temporarily borrow the eyes and ears of any animal under his contract. He realized this was essentially a first-person VR flight mode, and since both his beasts were birds, the possibilities were endless. Imagine the view, soaring through the sky and looking down at the world below. He continued broadcasting until 5 in the evening. Just as he finished, a young man rushed into the management hall with an excited look, prompting Chao Chung to ask if he needed help. Chao Chung hadn't even had a chance to ask a question before the young man spoke up, sounding surprisingly earnest and intense. The man, Jin Jia, said he wanted to collaborate on something big, and then he pulled a law enforcement badge from his pocket. He explained he was from the Yunhai City Bureau and needed help with a major case, which caught Chao Chung off guard. Naturally, Chao Chung immediately struck a righteous pose, declaring that assisting the law was every citizen's duty and obligation. He invited the officer to take a seat, and before we know it, time has jumped to 11:30 p.m. at the Bureau's command center. There, director Song Tae-han was busy coordinating his team, tracking 3 suspects involved in a high-profile human trafficking case. However, after following them to a remote village, the 3 suspects did something entirely unexpected. They abandoned the main path, traveled on foot for a while, and then climbed into the mountains, splitting off in 3 different directions. Song Tae-han and Captain Luo, who shared a grim look as they watched the monitors, realizing the gravity of the situation. It seems this criminal group was incredibly cautious, which, to be honest, explains how they've managed to evade capture for so long. Monitoring them on these narrow mountain trails was proving nearly impossible, and the officers nearby were struggling to maintain visual contact. Sure enough, they soon lost the suspect's trail entirely, forcing the director to order all personnel to cease the pursuit. Song Tae-han knew he couldn't risk his team any further under these conditions, as the danger was simply too high. If they continued the chase, their cover would likely be blown, leading not only to a failed mission, but something much worse. There was a real risk of casualties among his officers. Just then, Luo, who received a text message that made his eyes light up. He turned to Song Tae-han and whispered excitedly that it was Sister Xing, or rather, the director's own son, Song Xing. Song Tae-han's brow furrowed in annoyance. He felt Luo, who was being unprofessional by bringing up his son's antics at a time like this. He demanded to know what the boy was up to now, assuming it was just more trouble. But Luo, whose reply left him stunned. Song Xing claimed he was currently following the suspects. Song Tae-han could hardly believe his ears. The boy was asking for a communication channel, promising to provide a live feed of the suspects. Song Tae-han stood there in total shock. He urged them to hurry. If he wanted to figure out what his son was up to, he needed to establish contact immediately. Luo, who didn't waste a single second, and quickly sent the encrypted channel details to Song Xing. Before long, the encrypted channel began receiving signals, and several surveillance feeds suddenly flickered onto the large screen. We see a high-angle perspective, appearing as though the camera is perched on a tree branch, though the image is somewhat grainy. It was clearly using a low-light night vision camera, but fortunately, the distance was close enough to be useful. From this vantage point, they could see the suspects below with startling clarity. In the footage, a suspect crouched in the bushes, cautiously scanning his surroundings until his phone screen lit up. Only then did he stand and bolt toward a specific direction, with the camera following his every move instantly. The camera trailed him boldly from the side, occasionally emitting a strange, harsh cawing sound. It was unmistakably the cry of a crow, and just then, 2 more video feeds popped up on the display. Incredibly, these were feeds of the other 2 suspects, both captured from the same low-altitude tracking perspective. Everyone in the command center clenched their fists in excitement, and even Song Tae-han felt his heart racing with shock. He wondered how this could even be possible, as the suspects frequently stopped to check their phones. They were clearly reading coded messages sent by the Red Clothes gang to guide their path. This proved they had no idea they were being followed, yet the question remained, how was anyone getting this close? It wasn't just one person. All 3 suspects were being tracked simultaneously from a very short distance. Even if it were a drone, even a silent one, it seemed impossible to remain undetected at such range. The suspects would only have to look up to see a massive dark shape, making the whole situation feel quite surreal. They wondered what was actually doing the tracking, noting the cause and the sound of flapping wings. It had to be crows. Given the quality of the low-light monitors, it seemed the cameras were actually strapped to the birds themselves. It was truly beyond belief, and the room was filled with a mixture of profound shock and intense excitement. They were stunned that anyone could train birds to track targets through the mountains at night. It seemed impossible. In that moment, every eye in the room turned, whether intentionally or not, towards Song Tae-han. They wondered when exactly Tae-han had managed to deploy such a clever and unconventional secret weapon. Yet, the most shocked person in the room was Tae-han himself, remembering the moment just before the meeting began. He had received a call from his son, Song Xingjie, who had insisted quite firmly that he could help. He hadn't believed him then, but now, his seemingly unreliable son had become his only real hope. About an hour later, the 3 suspects met up and arrived at a dilapidated breeding farm building. The windows of the worn-out facility were heavily covered with black cloth as the 3 men approached the gate. Someone opened the door from the inside, revealing a brightly lit interior. They had finally found the hideout. The command hall erupted in excitement, noting that the 3 crows were still active, with one circling high above. While that one monitored the terrain, the other 2 crows landed quietly on the roof of the building. The birds began pecking small holes in the black cloth, using their bodies to block the light from escaping. They positioned their cameras perfectly, providing 2 simultaneous feeds of everything happening inside the workshop. Inside, the place was glowing with light. People were eating and drinking, looking more like a corporate retreat than a gang. The number 1 fugitive, Hongyi, was clearly visible, sending a surge of adrenaline through the entire command center. They had originally braced themselves for a brutal battle, fearing the unknown variables hidden behind those walls. But they hadn't expected these 2 crows to provide what was essentially a live broadcast of the enemy's lair. To be honest, this felt less like a raid and more like taking an open book exam, until an operator suddenly shouted, He warned director Song that there was a hidden lookout, a revelation that sent everyone's hearts straight into their throats. As we look at the screen, we see the perspective of the crow circling outside. On the roof of a small shack about 300 meters from the factory, a man suddenly stood up. He was holding a device resembling a tablet and was urgently pulling out his phone to make a call. This was bad. Song Taizhan and the others were shocked, but in that moment, the crow carrying the monitor acted. It suddenly dived down, charging straight at the lookout and striking his hand with incredible speed. We hear the lookout cry out in pain on the feed as the crow takes flight once again. As the camera focuses on him again, we see that his phone has been knocked off the roof. He didn't stop to wonder why a bird would attack him. He simply jumped from the roof in a panic. He began sprinting toward the factory, shouting that there was but he couldn't finish his sentence. A dark figure suddenly leaped from the nearby bushes and swung a club directly at his face. With a dull thud, he fell straight to the ground, silenced. It was Xingjie. Luo, who grabbed Song Taizhan in excitement as they watched Song Xingjie take down the lookout with a single blow. Xingjie quickly crouched down to hide, leaving Song Taizhan completely stunned by what he was seeing. He never expected his son to be right there in the thick of it. This is Song Taizhan. Everyone listen up. The lookout has been neutralized. There is a signal at the 7 o'clock position of the factory. Identify it carefully. Everyone, raid the factory immediately. The 11 o'clock position behind the main gate is the primary fire point. Maintain heavy control. Shoot any resistors on sight, but try to take Hongyi alive if possible. Under Tieshan's clear command, the members of the operation moved swiftly toward the factory walls. Inside, the gang finally noticed something was wrong on their monitors, but by then, it was far too late. A massive hole was blasted through the factory door, followed immediately by 3 flashbangs flying inside. A large group of armed officers burst through the doors, flooding into the building. Inside, the gang members were already dazed and disoriented by the flashbangs as the tactical team rushed in. With heavy strikes to the back of the head, the room was filled with cries for mercy. They were running out of handcuffs. They resorted to using steel zip ties, binding everyone like rows of livestock as they reported back to headquarters. The report came through with excitement. The Hongyi criminal gang had been completely neutralized and brought under control. Back in the command hall, we see Song Taizhan finally let out a long, relieved breath. In his mind, he knew the true credit for this victory, aside from those 3 crows, belonged solely to Song Xingjie. Unfortunately, since Xingjie wasn't part of the official system, the formal honors would have to fall to his father instead. It was after 3 in the morning in the director's office when Song Taizhan frowned, raising a hand to interrupt. He asked for clarification, questioning if those birds had truly just flown back to the zoo on their own. He wanted to confirm if this mysterious man, Chao Cheng, had actually stayed inside the zoo the entire time. Xingjie nodded, confirming that during the entire operation, the man hadn't stepped a single foot outside. Song Taizhan and Luo, who exchanged looks of pure disbelief, their shock growing with every passing second. To be able to control birds for such precise, nearly perfect reconnaissance was already a feat of wonder. But for this master to achieve it without leaving his home, while miles away from the scene, was something else entirely. The fact that 3 crows completed the mission under these conditions seemed like a total fairy tale. And yet, it happened. Of course, besides the cameras, the crows were equipped with small wireless radios for communication. The master had issued his commands through voice alone, leading Song Taizhan to look at Luo, who with a meaningful gaze. He suggested that when one encounters such a remarkable talent, it is only right to pay them a formal visit. Luo, who and the others understood exactly what Taizhan meant. A man of such rare ability was someone they needed to meet. A man like this was undoubtedly a trump card for law enforcement, someone they needed to focus on and, more importantly, protect. After all, one never knows when a major case might require his unique help. A formal visit was definitely in order. We return to the following morning, where we find Chao Cheng having breakfast with Luo Jing and her mother. Suddenly, the cockatiel perched at the window cried out, announcing that guests had arrived at the gate. Chao Cheng told the 2 women to continue eating while he went to the zoo entrance to see who it was. Seeing Song Xingjie standing outside with an unfamiliar middle-aged man, Chao Cheng greeted him with a warm smile. He called out to Officer Song, causing Xingjie's eyes to twitch. He hadn't exactly told Luo Hu about his little masquerade. He had only claimed they were friends, so naturally, Luo Hu froze for a moment behind him upon hearing the title. Chao Cheng was equally confused by the reaction, but Xingjie quickly stepped in to bridge the awkward gap. He addressed Chao Cheng as Brother Chao, explaining that yesterday's operation had been a resounding success. They had helped the authorities crack a major case, but he admitted he had a small confession to make. With an embarrassed rub of his hands, he confessed that he wasn't actually an officer and had lied the day before. Chao Cheng was momentarily stunned, but Xingjie hurried to explain that the rest of the situation was very real. He introduced the man beside him as Luo Hu, the captain of the city's 1st Tactical Brigade and his father's right-hand man. Chao Cheng took a moment to observe Luo Hu, noting a certain sharp, disciplined aura surrounding the man. He sensed that Luo Hu wasn't just a leader in the police force, but likely a veteran with a military background as well. Giving Xingjia a look of mild annoyance, Chao Cheng asked who his father actually was, prompting the young man to lean in. When he whispered that his father was the chief of the bureau, Chao Cheng could only sniff in disbelief at the absurdity. He told the boy to finish his sentences all at once next time, rather than letting his reputation swing back and forth like a pendulum. He finally invited the young master inside, while Xingjia could only offer a sheepish, apologetic grin in return. Xingjia laughed and promised not to do it again, while Luo, who watched Chao Cheng closely, impressed by his calm and fearless demeanor. Afterward, we see them in the main hall, where they spent half an hour discussing the details of the recent operation. They offered him a reward for his help and expressed their hope that he might provide his unique assistance again in the future. Naturally, he agreed without hesitation. He was a hot-blooded young man, after all, and soon enough, the visitors took their leave. He returned to his live stream until 5 in the evening, but seeing only 38 reputation points, he felt a twinge of disappointment. To be honest, the number of viewers on his stream had been growing steadily every single day. At one point, the audience peaked at 160,000 people, and the gifts were pouring in faster than he could track. However, his reputation points were accumulating more slowly. He suspected people already knew of Chunganzu's existence. Since they were already aware of him, they stopped providing points, leading him to believe he needed a new approach once the zoo opened. Perhaps when these people visited in person and had a fresh experience, the reputation points would start flowing once more. But the first priority was still making money. Otherwise, the zoo would never open, so he finally put his phone away. Looking outside, we see nearly 200 ravens perched densely in the trees, while Heichuan stood like a silent guardian at the window. All those ravens outside recognized Heichuan as their king, following his every lead with absolute loyalty. Yesterday morning, when Heichuan returned with the flock, Chao Cheng had taken his last remaining spirit awakening and beast spirit pills. He mixed them into the water for the birds to share. Although they wouldn't reach the level of Heichuan or Wincy, it was a start. The mixture was enough to sharpen their wits, ensuring they would follow Heichuan's commands without question. It also made the ravens crave the effect. To keep receiving such spiritual medicine, they wouldn't leave even if he tried to drive them away. Suddenly, he slapped his forehead as a realization struck him, a moment of pure, unadulterated inspiration. He realized he could attract his livestream viewers to the zoo specifically to see the ravens, which were already becoming a viral sensation. The number of parody videos featuring his ravens was growing by the hour, and their popularity had reached a boiling point. With the money he currently had and the speed of his livestream earnings, he realized he could easily afford to hire 2 employees. Considering all these factors, it was finally time to open the zoo. Later, after dinner, we see him scrolling through his phone. He came across a post by someone calling herself Little Fairy Yingying, who was fabricating facts to smear him and the zoo. When he opened the comments, he was momentarily taken aback to see people accusing him of inciting cyberbullying and hosting fake live streams. However, the vast majority of the comments were actually filled with unflattering photos of the little fairy and sharp criticisms of her behavior. A name kept appearing in the comments, Xiao Zhang Talks Law, so, naturally, he clicked on the link to investigate. It was a verified account with a blue checkmark belonging to Xiao Zhang, who already boasted a following of 120,000 fans. Xiao Zhang had posted a video where he appeared as a handsome young man, sitting quite seriously and professionally before the camera. He released the video of the self-proclaimed fairy, Yingying, followed by a flurry of incriminating screenshots. He clearly explained the entire sequence of events from start to finish before finally reaching a very logical conclusion. He noted that if Yingying couldn't produce evidence to prove the Chungan Zoo owner was faking his streams, she was in trouble. There was a high probability of defamation, provided, of course, that the zoo owner decided to hold her legally accountable. The video had already garnered over 165,000 likes, and the comment section was overflowing with reactions. While many were still mocking Yingying, Chao Cheng found Xiao Zhang's particular approach to be quite fascinating. The creator's goal was clearly to expose these mean-spirited people, yet he avoided direct insults to stay clear of manipulating public opinion. Instead, he used the clever disguise of fan submissions and legal discussions to protect himself while delivering his message. Being a verified account and only citing public videos and screenshots made his arguments feel incredibly reliable. By using the law as a shield, he managed to expose the malice of these petty individuals with absolute clarity. The impact was so impressive that Chao Cheng felt like giving the young man a bonus for his hard work. As it turned out, the account was based right there in Yunhai, specifically located at the Yunhai University of Political Science and Law. Without a second thought, Chao Cheng sent him a 500 yuan red envelope along with a private message addressed to Brother. He introduced himself as the owner of Chungan Zoo and politely asked if the young man would be willing to visit for a chat. Early the next morning, we returned to the grounds of the Chungan Zoo, where the day was already beginning. Song Xinjia arrived asking if any help was needed, though Chao Cheng could only respond with a silent roll of his eyes. He wondered why a young master would spend all day at a rundown zoo, but since he was there, he had a job for him. He needed a batch of tickets printed urgently for the reopening, which, naturally, left Song Xinjia feeling a bit speechless. The young man protested, reminding Chao Cheng that he was the son of a director and shouldn't be running such trivial errands. Chao Cheng simply raised a hand and offered 1,000 yuan as a delivery fee, causing Song Xinjia's attitude to shift instantly. With a smooth change of heart, he guaranteed the tickets would arrive within 2 hours, barely finishing his sentence before moving. Song Xinjia hurried off, and just then, the student behind the Shaozhong Talks Law account arrived at the gates. The young man from Yunhai University introduced himself as Zhang Wei, confirming he was indeed the creator of the legal channel. He mentioned seeing the private message, and Chao Cheng welcomed him warmly, inviting him inside to discuss matters further. A little later, in the management hall, we see the two of them talking as Zhang Wei expressed his genuine admiration. He admitted he had never seen anyone train birds to such a degree, calling the display absolutely incredible. He noted that the training tutorials being sold on site A were a bit expensive, or he would have bought one himself. This made Chao Cheng freeze in confusion. As Zhang Wei explained, he meant the tutorials sold under Chao Cheng's name on site A. They were priced at nearly 2,000 yuan each, which immediately signaled to Chao Cheng that something was very wrong. Aside from his main social media account, he hadn't registered on any other platforms yet, so he quickly downloaded the app. He searched for his own name and, to his surprise, found an account titled Chingan Zhu, Holy Son of the Beast-Taming Sect. The account already had 620,000 followers and was even officially verified as a well-known creator. In just 4 short days, this person had posted over 50 videos, all of them clips taken directly from Chao Cheng's live streams. And there, in the account's digital storefront, was an online course titled Ancestral Bird Training Methods. It was priced at nearly 2,000 yuan, and the records showed it had already sold 191 copies. The total revenue was nearly 380,000 yuan, causing Chao Cheng to let out a slow, quiet curse of disbelief. He had worked so hard with his system, buying equipment and staying glued to his live streams for entire days at a time. There were times he barely had a moment to eat, or even a chance to step away for a necessary break. After all that effort, he had only made about the same amount, yet a pirate account stealing his videos and selling a fake course had managed to rake in 40,000 yuan just like that. Zhang Wei looked at him and asked tentatively if the account really wasn't his. Chao Cheng asked if he looked like an acting school graduate, prompting Zhang Wei to take a sharp breath as the reality set in. The young man then delivered more bad news, explaining that it wasn't just on this one platform. From Lushu and Manzhou to Weishi and even Mahudo, his content was being spread everywhere. Zhang Wei pulled out his phone to show him, and sure enough, the situation was exactly as he described. Aside from his main platform, every other major social media site had an account impersonating him. 2 other platforms were selling the exact same course, clearly the work of the same person. Chao Cheng asked if this was illegal. He asked with a hint of suppressed anger, and Zhang Wei nodded, confirming it was a massive violation of the law. He assured him that any decent lawyer could win this case, which led Chao Cheng to point out that Zhang Wei was a legal expert himself. He asked if the student could handle the lawsuit, but Zhang Wei gave an embarrassed smile, reminding him he was still just a student. Without a license, he couldn't represent individuals, though he could represent a company if he were hired as their legal counsel. In that specific role, he could handle the company's legal affairs. This gave Chao Cheng a sudden, brilliant idea. Since Zhang Wei was looking for work, he suggested the young man try a position at the zoo, despite its currently humble state. Chao Cheng promised that the pay wouldn't be a penny short, including full insurance, housing funds, commissions, and bonuses. Zhang Wei's breathing grew rapid with excitement, and he stammered that it wasn't about the money or the place. He wasn't looking down on the zoo at all. He was simply stunned that Chao Cheng would place so much trust in him. He reminded him that he was still just a student with no real experience, but Chao Cheng simply patted his arm. He told the boy that experience only comes from practice, and he was offering him all the space he needed to learn. This was the fastest way to grow, and to be honest, Chao Cheng saw immense potential in young Zhang Wei. He knew the student was a growth stock, because if he didn't have the knowledge or the confidence to back it up, he never would have started a specialized legal account. Zhang Wei asked, almost trembling, if he was truly hired. Chao Cheng confirmed it, though he noted that since Zhang Wei was an intern, the benefits would be scaled appropriately. Zhang Wei had already prepared himself for this, expecting a much lower offer given his lack of a license. He was willing to work for free just to get his foot in the door, telling Chao Cheng that he would accept any terms. Chao Cheng nodded and explained that he also needed him to handle social media operations as a part-time responsibility. Since this was essentially 2 jobs, the base salary would be 8,000 yuan, plus 10% of any legal settlements. Knowing school might be busy, he offered a flexible schedule with 100 hours of personal leave per month. With full benefits, a standard workday, and weekends off, he asked the student if he was ready to draft the contract. But as he spoke, he noticed Zhang Wei had actually started to cry, which caught him completely off guard. Through his tears, Zhang Wei asked if this was some kind of cruel joke, insisting he truly wanted to work hard. The terms sounded far too good to be true. In fact, they sounded like a total fantasy in the current job market. We see Chao Cheng caught between laughter and pity, though he admitted to himself he enjoyed teasing the boy a little. He knew perfectly well that the offer he just made far exceeded the market rate for any fresh graduate or intern. Chao Cheng had simply wanted to use a light-hearted tone, though it had clearly made the situation feel a bit surreal for the young man. He asked Zhang Wei if he looked like the type to make such boring jokes, giving him a firm, reassuring look to seal the promise. Zhang Wei met his gaze and slowly stopped sobbing, asking once more if this truly wasn't some elaborate prank. He admitted the terms were incredibly generous, especially the 10% commission on legal settlements. Looking at the case against the platform for selling customer data, he estimated they could force the opposition to pay dearly. They would likely have to spit out all illegal profits, which would be at least 400,000 yuan at a minimum. That meant a 40,000 yuan commission for just one case, and if they sued every platform, the numbers would be staggering. He realized his earnings could easily reach 6 figures, but Chao Cheng simply wagged a finger, saying it all depended on his skill. Finally believing his luck, Zhang Wei gave a clumsy, makeshift salute and promised Chao Cheng he wouldn't let him down. He vowed to sue them until they had nothing left, and Chao Cheng told him to go prepare the employment and power of attorney contracts. With a determined nod, Zhang Wei wiped his tears with his sleeve and bolted out of the room at a full sprint. Just then, Chao Cheng's phone chimed with a notification. 1 million yuan had been deposited into his account, sending a jolt through his heart. He wondered what was happening, surprised that any bank would allow such a massive transfer to process so instantly. Checking his phone, he saw the transfer came directly from Huaxiao Bank, and a suspicion began to form in his mind. He wondered if this was the reward for Operation Top Prize, and sure enough, Song Xinjie called him almost immediately. Song Xinjie confirmed that the rewards for the operation had been released, 1 million yuan for each of them. He told Chao Cheng not to be too surprised, as these awards are usually more about honor than such a significant amount of cash. He had expected 50,000 at most, but because the provincial government was closely watching this major case, the stakes were higher. The province wanted to show how much they valued the result, and Chao Cheng knew better than to ask too many questions about it. As he hung up the phone, the system suddenly made its presence known once again. He wasn't just happy, he had gained 20 reputation points. To achieve that through a livestream, he would have needed to reach at least 2 million people. And yet, simply by helping to catch a group of human traffickers, his reputation had increased by 20 points in one go. We see him sink into deep thought, realizing that dismantling a human trafficking ring was undoubtedly a massive contribution to society. It was only natural that such an act would garner a significant amount of prestige. Once he understood this, everything became clear. Excited by the realization, he began to examine the 10,000 paths to enlightenment. It was a profound and mysterious technique. The technique suggested that everything in heaven and earth could find its path, allowing the user to discover the potential within spirit beasts. Beyond simple cultivation, it could identify the most suitable path for a beast, greatly increasing their speed of growth and power. This, in turn, would provide a feedback loop to strengthen the master. His eyes lit up at the sheer possibility of it all. If he could discover the specific paths for his spirit beasts and supervise their training, they could essentially carry him to new heights. He immediately began to learn the technique. Just then, Wenxi the parrot flew back into the room, carrying a pile of live streaming equipment. Chao Cheng instantly activated the 10,000 paths technique, sending a mysterious, ethereal sense of perception toward the bird. As the energy reached him, Wenxi seemed to sense something strange entering his mind, as if a new furnace of knowledge had been opened. The technique worked its magic, but the result was unexpected. Wenxi suddenly shouted for his master to prepare some adult movies for him to watch. The parrot shook his head and yelled through their mental link, revealing that his specific path to enlightenment was tied to such base desires. Since the technique was a specialized cultivation method for spirit beasts, once Chao Cheng mastered it, his contracted beasts would follow suit. He stared at the bird with a look of utter disbelief. He hadn't realized that Wenxi wasn't just a bird, but a total beast in the worst way. Meanwhile, Heichuan, who had been resting on a tree outside the window, flew inside and landed directly in front of him. As Chao Cheng activated the technique once more to probe Heichuan, the beast immediately felt the shift in the air and exposed his deepest nature. Heichuan's desire was far more noble, the way of kings. Chao Cheng was delighted to find that Heichuan's path was one of leadership. It turned out his path was to increase his ability to command subordinates. The more followers he had, the stronger his own power became. The more focused he became, the more his power to unify others would grow. To put it simply, his desire to be a king wasn't a bad thing at all. From now on, Heichuan could use this path to increase his cultivation. Chao Cheng told him that, besides his training, he was to lead the flock of crows in a 10-minute flight over the zoo every 2 hours. During the rest of the day, they could interact with tourists or head out in groups to find food. A busy schedule, to be sure. After 8 in the evening, however, Heichuan was free to do as he pleased. The spirit eagle accepted his new duties. We see that Chao Cheng's intentions were quite simple. He wanted to create an air of mystery and intrigue around the park. Since he planned to open the zoo that very day, and there was nothing to see but crows, he had to get creative. He needed the crows to perform these magical behaviors to make people feel curious and perhaps a little confused. He imagined people traveling along the city's main roads, looking up toward the northern sky and seeing something strange. They would see a massive flock of black crows circling like a dark, living cloud in a perfect ring. If it happened every 2 hours, wouldn't they want to come and investigate? After sending H1 off, he turned to his next task. Just then, Luo Jin walked downstairs. Chao Qing told him they were opening today and that he should man the ticket booth. Luo Jin was stunned. In his mind, if a zoo wanted to reopen successfully, it needed actual exhibits. At the very least, they should have brought in some animals. Even if they weren't high-rank spirit beasts, they needed something. Currently, the zoo was just full of snakes, insects, and birds. Who would pay to see that? To see just crows? Chao Chang understood his concerns perfectly, so he simply pointed toward the massive flock of crows gathered in the trees outside. Luo Jin nodded slowly, then asked if they should use the old tickets for 10 yuan each. Chao Qing shook his head. He explained that he had already ordered new tickets with the updated price, 100 yuan per person. Yes, you heard that right. Luo Jin's jaw dropped in disbelief. Even the largest zoo in the city only charged 100 yuan for a ticket. He worried that charging that much just to see crows would get them dragged on social media. Chao Cheng just clapped his hands and smiled. Just then, Zhang Wei from Diamond Law came running in, clutching a contract tightly in his hand. Zhang Wei stopped before Chao Cheng, panting for breath, only to realize that Luo Jin was standing right there. Zhang Wei was momentarily stunned by Luo Jin's beauty, and he quickly offered a cheeky, awkward greeting. He called her sister-in-law, making Luo Jin blush furiously, while Chao Cheng simply didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chao Cheng corrected him, explaining that Luo Jin was a senior employee, which prompted Zhang Wei to apologize immediately. After they exchanged greetings, Chao Cheng introduced Zhang Wei as their new legal counsel for all future company matters. Luo Jin offered a polite smile, feeling relieved that the zoo finally had another dedicated staff member on board. Chao Cheng then sent Luo Jin to the ticket booth while he sat down with Zhang Wei to sign the labor contract. As soon as the contract was signed, a notification chimed, 1 new sect disciple and 1 sect prestige point added. His current prestige stood at 59 points, just 1 point away from unlocking the next set of rewards. He told Zhang Wei to focus entirely on the upcoming lawsuits and not to worry about the zoo's daily operations. By 10 in the morning, Song Xinjia had returned with 4 large boxes of tickets and stacked them at the booth. Chao Cheng immediately started a live stream, and within 10 minutes, the viewer count surged past 100,000 people. He announced that the Chang'an Zoo was officially reopening today, noting that while they lacked rare beasts, they had the crows. We see him turn the camera toward the sky, capturing the massive flock of crows circling majestically above the park. The chat was filled with excitement until he announced the 100 yuan ticket price, which sparked a wave of complaints. However, many local fans remained undeterred, enthusiastically shouting in the comments that they were heading over right now. Before long, the area outside Chang'an Zoo was completely packed with cars and eager visitors. A quick count showed at least 200 or 300 people had arrived, with crows perched on signs and railings everywhere. The birds were even on the steps and ground, as tourists scrambled to interact and take photos with them. Some of the birds even landed on the visitors' shoulders to pose for photos, triggering waves of excited cheers from the crowd. We see a young woman approach a large tree near the management office, though the glass doors to the lobby remained locked. Inside, a man was busy managing a live stream, his phone propped up securely on a tripod. Recognizing him as the owner from the viral videos, the woman stepped forward to get his attention. She reached out to knock on the door, but just as she stepped onto the stairs, something stopped her. A massive crow swept past her face, causing Tong Anya to cry out in surprise and stumble back 2 steps. The crow landed on a nearby windowsill, tilting its head as it stared intently at Anya. A shiver ran down her spine because, strangely enough, she felt she could read a hint of warning in the bird's eyes. It felt as if the bird would attack the moment she touched that door. After a moment of shock, she reconsidered her approach. Anya retreated several paces, pulling out her phone to begin recording a video of her own. She aimed the camera first at the crow on the windowsill, then panned up toward the trees filled with birds. She then hurried through the park, filming the crows at close range while providing a professional commentary. She introduced herself as research intern Tong Anya, reporting from a small zoo in Yunhai City. She noted that these crows were exhibiting unprecedented behavioral anomalies, gathering here in massive, organized numbers. They were interacting with tourists and allowing close-up observation, something quite unheard of for wild birds. While online rumors suggested the owner had tamed them, Anya remained skeptical of such a simple explanation. To her expert eye, their physical characteristics and movements suggested they were in a completely wild state. They certainly didn't look like captive-bred animals. Once the recording was finished, she looked at her screen thoughtfully. She wanted to send the footage directly to the head of her institute, Professor Huang, but she was only an intern. Lacking the professor's direct contact, she sent the video to a research assistant's phone instead, hoping it would be noticed. She added a quick note, asking senior brother Song Qing to please inform Professor Huang about the situation as soon as possible. When the research assistant, Song Qing, opened the video and watched it, her eyes immediately lit up with excitement. Songqing's first instinct was to pick up the phone and call Professor Huang right away to share the discovery. But then she remembered the professor was in a meeting. A sudden, ambitious thought began to take root in her mind. A flock of crows this large, gathered in a completely wild state, was a phenomenon of immense scientific interest. To her, this meant the potential for a brand new research project, one that could secure a very generous amount of funding. There was a high probability of achieving something truly groundbreaking here, provided the matter was reported correctly. She knew a special task force would be formed, but since the professor had so many students, she wasn't exactly his favorite. If she reported it now, she might just be a messenger. But if she acted while the professor was still busy, if she took the initiative and organized a small scouting party now, she could seize the advantage before anyone else. That way, she would secure a leading role in the eventual research group. With that decided, her heart began to race. Despite her plan, she still dialed Professor Huang's number, her hand trembling slightly with a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew he wouldn't answer during his meeting, which was exactly the point. It was all about having an alibi later. She could tell him she tried to call immediately, but since he was busy and time was of the essence, she had to act. As expected, the call rang twice before being disconnected. With a small, triumphant smile, Songqing knew the stage was set. She whispered to herself that it was time to begin. A short while later, she and her team arrived at the zoo. Songqing looked up at the crows swirling through the air and gave one of the interns a firm pat on the shoulder. She pointed toward the mountains, noting that the birds flying that way were likely heading off to forage for food. It was a strange detail, really. These crows would interact with the tourists, yet they refused to touch a single scrap of their food. The whole situation was becoming increasingly bizarre. She wondered why they were here, just as Anya had mentioned. We see Songqing lost in thought, wondering aloud if all these crows had been personally trained by the zoo's owner. She decided they needed to capture 2 of them to attach GPS trackers and biological data recorders. She was determined to see what they were doing in the mountains, so she ordered her team to bring out the net gun. One of the interns quickly rummaged through a crate and pulled out the capture gun, handing it over to Songqing. After finding a spot where the crows were gathered in large numbers, she raised the weapon and aimed at a single bird. The crow tilted its head and looked at her, letting out a sharp caw that sounded suspiciously like a warning. With a muffled thud, a dark projectile was fired, bursting open in midair into a wide net of fine silk thread. The net landed perfectly over the crow, which began to flap its wings violently as it became hopelessly entangled. It let out a series of strange, frantic caws as it fell to the ground, and Songqing stepped forward with a satisfied smile. As she began to pull the trapped bird toward her, Anya suddenly called out, asking her what on earth she was doing. Songqing just laughed and told her junior to go get the equipment, but she didn't even get to finish her sentence. She noticed a look of pure terror on Anya's face as she stared at something behind her, and Songqing whipped her head around. A massive, dark cloud of crows was diving toward her in a frenzy, having launched a coordinated sneak attack. Strangely enough, they hadn't made a single sound during their descent, keeping their approach completely silent. By the time Songqing realized what was happening, it was already far too late to move out of the way. One crow slammed directly into her face. If she hadn't instinctively closed her eyes, the results would have been far worse. The bird's beak nearly struck her left eye, followed immediately by a barrage of pecks and sharp claws hitting her face. The sheer force of the flock swarming over her body was terrifying to behold, a scene of absolute, feathered chaos. Songqing began to scream as she was overwhelmed by the attack, leaving Anya standing there in a state of total shock. The other interns quickly took off their jackets and began waving them wildly, shouting at the top of their lungs to drive the crows away. But the flock of crows seemed to have locked onto a single target, swarming Songqing with a terrifying, singular focus. They completely ignored the other interns' attempts to drive them away, as if they knew exactly who had fired that net. Once the initial panic subsided, Songqing's fear was replaced by a surge of pure rage, and she swung her heavy net gun like a club. It was, after all, a solid metal rod, and several crows were struck hard by the desperate, heavy swing. The injured birds were knocked out of the air, and for a brief moment, the rest of the flock scattered to avoid the impact. This gave Songqing a momentary chance to breathe, and she roared in fury, swearing she would kill every last one of them. She began reloading the net gun, determined to fire another shot directly into the thickest part of the black cloud above. If this next net landed, she could easily trap 6 or 7 of them at once. But that was when everything changed. A figure suddenly emerged from the management office, charging toward the group with incredible, almost frantic speed. Before Songqing could even raise her weapon, the figure reached her and delivered a powerful kick straight to her chest. The force of the blow was immense, sending Songqing flying backward several meters through the air. The other interns, who had been busy waving their jackets at the birds, didn't fare much better in the chaos. The figure moved like a blur, kicking each of them to the ground before they could even process what was happening. Luckily, Anya had been standing far enough away to avoid the assault, while the owner stood there, staring coldly at the fallen group. He had just finished his live stream and was actually planning to go greet the researchers who had arrived at his park. He told himself it was only polite to welcome them, but he hadn't even stepped out of the office when he sensed trouble. Haichin, the lead crow, had used a spiritual connection to alert him immediately to the violence happening outside. He looked down at them and asked who gave these fools permission to run wild on his property, leaving Songqing speechless. One of the interns curled up on the ground, clutching his chest and stammering that they were from the Agricultural University Research Institute. He cried out that the woman he just kicked was a professional researcher, but the owner reminded them they hadn't even paid for tickets. "You attacked my crows," he stated coldly, but Songqing snapped back, claiming they were only trying to attach trackers for research. He asked if he had ever granted permission for such research, just as Songqing finally managed to catch her breath. She had spiraled into a state of absolute fury, screaming that academic research didn't require the permission of someone like him. She sneered, asking what right he had to stop her, calling him a mere bird streamer who dared to lay a hand on her. Before Songqing's roar of anger could even fade, he delivered another swift kick, this time landing directly on her face. Songqing erupted in a fit of helpless, desperate rage, screaming that he was in serious trouble now, the biggest trouble of his life. She threatened to call the police immediately for the assault on scientific personnel, vowing to make sure he rotted in a prison cell. She promised to ruin his reputation forever as she pulled out her phone to dial, while the other interns finally began to recover. They quickly gathered around Songqing, glaring at him like a pack of cornered animals, trying to look intimidating despite their bruises. Meanwhile, Anya stood back, silently cursing Songqing for being such an utter fool. She wondered how the woman could be so blind to the fact that Chao-Ching wasn't intimidated by her researcher title at all. Anya hurried forward, hoping to explain the situation further and de-escalate the tension before things got even worse. However, he only gave her a cold, dismissive glance before turning his back to check on the injured crows. One of the birds was indeed badly hurt, and he knew he couldn't perform his mystical healing arts right in front of these people. He gently picked up the wounded crow and walked quickly back into the management office hall, leaving the group behind. To Songqing and her team, this looked like a retreat, as if he were hiding, though she sneered that there was nowhere to run. Songqing laughed through gritted teeth while the other interns helped tend to her injuries, waiting for the authorities to arrive. By the time he finished treating the crows and stepped back outside, 2 law enforcement officers were already waiting for him. The male officer barely had a chance to start his questioning before the owner gave an unexpectedly calm nod of confirmation. "Yes," he admitted simply, catching the officer off guard with an attitude that seemed almost too bold for the situation. He explained calmly that these crows were second-class protected wildlife, and they had simply been enjoying their time at his zoo. As we see him step outside, the 2 law enforcement officers suddenly begin to tremble, their confidence vanishing in an instant. Their eyes widened in utter disbelief as they recognized the man leading the group approaching them. It appeared to be Song Xinjia, the director's son, who was known for keeping a surprisingly low profile. And walking right behind him, surrounded by the crowd, was none other than director Song Taizhan himself. Following them were Luo Hu, Qian Weiming, and Zhou Yueming, essentially every heavy hitter from the Municipal Enforcement Bureau. These were their highest-ranking superiors, and realizing this, the 2 officers immediately forgot everything else they were doing. They rushed forward, snapping into a rigid salute and shouting "Director," in perfect, terrified unison. Song Taizhan looked rather confused as to why 2 of his officers were even here, casually asking them for their names. Standing at attention, they identified themselves as Chun Jiao and Wang He from the Huabei Road Police Station, reporting for duty. As Song Taizhan looked past them, his brow furrowed deeply at the chaotic scene unfolding behind his men. He saw Songqing covered in blood and asked what on earth had happened, while Songqing and her team stood there, completely stunned. They realized this was the legendary director Song Taizhan, and they couldn't fathom why such a powerful man would be here. He had brought a massive entourage, all dressed in plain clothes, creating a sight that was as imposing as it was unexpected. These were the titans of the city's enforcement agencies, people an ordinary citizen would almost never see in person. Just as the 2 officers prepared to explain, Song Xinjia noticed something glinting between Chao Cheng's wrists. Seeing the silver handcuffs, his face twisted in anger as he demanded to know who the hell had dared to lock him up. Song Taizhan and the others finally noticed the restraints as well, and the atmosphere turned cold enough to freeze. Their expressions became grim, their collective gaze shifting toward the 2 officers like a physical weight. The officers turned as pale as sheets, and the female officer's legs began to give way under the sheer pressure of the moment. His hand instinctively moved toward his empty belt, but he realized too late that he was standing before the city's highest-ranking officials. Naturally, they could see at a single glance that his equipment was missing, specifically, the handcuffs that should have been on his hip. Song Tieshan's brows furrowed in a sharp, angry V as he demanded to know what on earth was going on here today. He had personally brought this entire group, even pushing back their official duties, just to show how much they valued this visit. The plan was to commend Chao Cheng and build a relationship with this extraordinary man, but now, everything was going sideways. These 2 officers had arrived early only to ruin the atmosphere, and he demanded to know exactly why they had restrained him. Song Tieshan's voice was cold, carrying an imposing weight that felt almost suffocating to those standing before him. Chun Jiao and Wang He were completely paralyzed with fear, and it wasn't until Luo who barked an order that Wang He finally found his voice. He stammered that they had received a report of an intentional assault and had rushed to the scene to investigate. He explained that the researchers from the institute claimed they were here to study the unusual behavior of the crow flock. They alleged the zoo owner had beaten them, prompting Song Taizhan to ask why. Why would he do such a thing? The owner claimed he saw them attacking the crows, which are protected wildlife, and insisted he was merely stopping a crime. He had intervened to prevent a violation of the law, but then the question remained, had the researchers actually attacked the birds? Wang He swallowed hard, his throat dry as he admitted, with a trembling voice, that he simply didn't know the truth yet. Luo who roared in frustration, demanding to know how on earth he could arrest someone without knowing the facts of the case. Wang He felt like he might actually be sick from the pressure, quickly pointing out that it wasn't his idea to make the arrest. He explained that the owner had asked them to check the surveillance footage first, but Chun Jiao insisted they would handle it their own way. She had demanded unconditional cooperation and then proceeded to cuff him, an act that, in hindsight, was a terrible mistake. By now, Chun Jiao's face was utterly devoid of color, the realization sinking in that she had stepped into a massive disaster. She never could have imagined in her wildest dreams that her abuse of power would be caught red-handed by every major boss in the city. Unshackle him first, Song Taizhan ordered Luo who, barely managing to keep his simmering anger under control. Luo who pulled out the keys, but Song Xinjie was too impatient to wait and snatched them away to unlock the cuffs himself. However, Chao Cheng began spinning in circles, looking everywhere but at the keys to avoid being unlocked, while Xinjie whispered for him to stop. "My friend, please don't make a scene," Xinjie pleaded, as the two of them performed a ridiculous dance in place. Song Taizhan and the others were speechless. The young man was clearly being difficult, though, to be honest, they could understand why. Imagine the situation. You've just helped the city bureau prevent a massive disaster, and this is your reward. Before receiving any praise, your own trained crows are attacked, and when you step in to stop it, you're the one targeted. Instead of a hero's welcome, the authorities arrive and throw you in handcuffs. It was a truly humiliating turn of events. Deep down, they knew Chao Cheng wasn't just being stubborn. He was demanding that they show him the respect he deserved. Failing to open the cuffs, Song Xinjie reached into Chao Cheng's pocket instead, using his biometric ID to unlock his phone. He skillfully opened the surveillance app, found the relevant footage, and immediately handed the phone over to Song Taizhan. As Song Taizhan and his officials watched the recording, their expressions shifted from concern to absolute indignation. "We see the truth now. Those researchers were actually using net guns to shoot the crows and were actively fighting the flock. They had injured several birds, which was simply outrageous, considering these crows had just performed a great service for the city. If it hadn't been for Chao Cheng and his crows turning the tide, Song Tieshan's own career might have been in serious jeopardy." "Arrest them all," he roared, and as the researchers were being marched out of the zoo, the group came to a sudden halt. Everyone froze in surprise at the sight of dozens of flower baskets and money trees lining both sides of the entrance. The displays were covered in banners wishing for a grand opening and great prosperity, but it was the two largest baskets that drew every eye. The name written clearly on the ribbons was none other than Song Taizhan himself, and as they looked further down the line, they saw names like Luo Hu, Qian Weiming, and Zhou Yueming. Not a single major official had been left out. Every single one of them was a leader from the city bureau. It seemed Song Taizhan and his colleagues had actually come to celebrate the opening. It felt impossible, yet there they were at the zoo, having arrived specifically to offer their congratulations. By now, Song Xinjie had finally managed to unlock the handcuffs, and Song Taizhan reached out his hand with a smile. He explained that they had come to celebrate the opening and, while they were at it, to present a formal commendation. He admitted he hadn't expected their first meeting to happen quite like this, offering a sincere apology for the misunderstanding. Chao Cheng shook the man's powerful hand, insisting that he was the one who should apologize, as Xinjie had actually called ahead. He noted that he should have been there to welcome such distinguished guests and asked for their forgiveness for the delay. In truth, 2 minutes before leaving the management hall, he had already received a phone call from Song Xinjie. Xinjie had warned him that his father was arriving with a group to celebrate the opening and to have a proper chat. It was precisely because he knew this was coming that he had allowed Chun Jiao to handcuff him so easily. A bit of theater, perhaps. Song Taizhan and the others were surprised to find him so reasonable. Clearly, this young man knew how to handle social graces. Business is business, after all, and as he led them into the management hall, it was time for the promised commendation. The city bureau had prepared a special medal for him, a striking gold and red plaque that caught the light beautifully. It was shaped like a decorative silk ball, with intricate patterns along the edges and the date of issuance engraved on the back. It bore the official seal of the Yunhai City Law Enforcement Bureau, recognizing his extraordinary contribution to the recent operation. Only 2 such medals existed, one for him and one for Song Xinjie, and once the ceremony was over, the atmosphere relaxed. Chao Chung, of course, spun a bit of a tall tale, painting his grandfather as a legendary master of animal training from the countryside. After all, Song Tieshan's real goal today was simply to meet him in person and gauge what kind of man he truly was. Once the pleasantries were finished and the officials had departed, Chao Chung took a quiet stroll through the park grounds. The day's ticket sales had reached 30,000 yuan, which wasn't a bad start at all. Things, it seemed, were looking up. He was just about to tell Luo Jin to finish up for the day and grab some dinner, when he suddenly spotted something in a corner of the park. Under a large tree stood a girl in a black evening gown, using bits of food to lure the local crows toward her. Not far in front of her, a phone was mounted high up, clearly set to record the entire scene. She was likely trying to capture the perfect aesthetic photo, and to be honest, the black dress and the dark crows were a striking match. The ensemble was a perfect fit, creating a sharp contrast against her pale skin as she moved through the shadows. But as we looked closer at her face, Chao Cheng's mood shifted instantly to anger. It was that woman again. She was the one who had been with the Research Institute group earlier that day, appearing to be one of their scientists. When Song Taizhan had taken Song Qin and the others into custody, this particular woman had been nowhere to be found. He assumed she had sensed trouble and fled early, only to return now having changed into a completely different outfit. He shouted for her to get out, making it clear that a change of clothes wasn't enough to hide her identity from him. The outburst gave the girl quite a fright, but she quickly recovered, flashing a sweet and charming smile. She pressed her hands together in a pleading gesture, looking almost tragically beautiful as she begged the boss for a moment of his time. She desperately wanted the crows to cooperate for a few photos, explaining that she had been trying all day without much luck. Chao Chung, however, had no patience for this and repeated his demand for her to leave immediately. He declared that anyone from her research institute was banned from the premises, which was when the girl realized the source of the confusion. Lifting her skirt, she hurried over and waved her hands frantically, insisting that he had mistaken her for someone else. She explained that the woman in glasses was her twin sister, Tong Anya, while her own name was Tong Anchi. She claimed they weren't close at all, jokingly suggesting they hadn't been on speaking terms since leaving the womb. Chao Chung frowned as she drew closer, observing her more carefully this time. Up close, he could sense that her temperament was indeed different from the sister in glasses. They really were twins. We see that the difference in temperament between the two sisters was truly night and day. The elder was a cold academic. The younger sister, however, was flirtatious and lively. Chao Chung muttered that like sister, they were likely the same. He accused her of being sent by her sister to spy on the crows, but Tong Anchi shook her head frantically in denial. She explained that she was a beauty dancer, a profession she claimed combined various forms of beauty with dance. It was a career she had created herself, and to prove it, she showed him her social media page with over 1.5 million followers. As he scrolled through her posts, he realized she was essentially a viral influencer specializing in provocative dances, a beauty dancer indeed. She argued that being alluring was a form of beauty, and since she needed to earn a living, she saw no shame in it. Tong Anchi then opened her photo album to show him the videos and aesthetic shots she had managed to capture that day. The black evening gown matched the dark crows perfectly, and with a slightly dark filter, the effect was quite striking. She looked like a dark princess from a fairy tale, but Chao Chung simply told her to come back tomorrow as they were closing. She pleaded with him not to kick her out, hoping to catch the last of the sunset to finish her photo shoot. She begged for just a little more time, admitting she knew that the crows followed his every command. Biting her lips softly, she asked if he could make them cooperate for just a few more photos. She tugged at his hand playfully, but he remained unmoved, noting that while the crows listened to him, he had no reason to listen to her. When she asked what he wanted, he realized he was short-staffed and suggested she come work for him instead. He told her he would pay her a salary, provided she showed up tomorrow wearing her most revealing outfit to start the job. The work was simple: interact with the crows, attract customers, and occasionally help him manage his own live streams. Tong Anchi was momentarily speechless, offended that he was treating her like a common street performer or a trained animal. He countered by saying that if she took the job, all the crows would be at her disposal for any photos she wanted. And of course, he planned to train even more animals in the future, creatures that were cute, beautiful, and even fierce. He promised her they would all be available as employee benefits, allowing her to take as many photos as she liked. Tong Anchi quickly agreed, and a little later, after she left, Chao Chung returned to his room upstairs. He felt a sudden surge of joy as a powerful wave of spiritual energy began to flow into his body. He could feel his control over this energy and his physical functions reaching an entirely new level of mastery. He had reached the middle stage of qi refining, a truly marvelous sensation. Early the next morning, in the north of Yunhai City, we find ourselves at the wildlife rescue station, where a dying tiger is currently undergoing emergency treatment. The experts at the Yunhai Wildlife Rescue Center shook their heads. The tiger had simply lost too much blood. They feared they were powerless to save it, and if the tiger died, the lead expert on the scene, along with everyone else in charge, would have to take the blame. Standing at the back of the crowd, the owner of Green Forest Zoo pulled Director Zhang, the head of the rescue center, aside and whispered that he had a plan. He suggested a way for the director to get rid of this hot potato. Meanwhile, Xiao Cheng had just finished his breakfast. Both Tong Anqi and Zhang Wei arrived to report for duty, and he had Zhang Wei draft a labor contract for the new girl. As soon as the contract was signed, his system notified him that his prestige had increased by 1, bringing his total to 61. At this time, tourists began to trickle in, though today's crowd was noticeably thinner than before. After all, who would pay 100 yuan every single day just to look at crows? To be honest, he had a point. He realized he needed to add new attractions quickly. Now that he was in the middle stage of qi refining, he could bond with a third beast. He began to wonder what kind of creature his third spiritual pet should be. While he was deep in thought, a sudden commotion broke out at the entrance. He moved toward the gate to see what was happening. Through the eyes of the crows stationed at the entrance, he saw dozens of vehicles lining up outside the zoo. Leading the convoy was a transport vehicle resembling an ambulance, marked with the logo of the Yunhai Wildlife Rescue Center. Xiao Cheng walked quickly to the entrance, where he found Director Zhang already in the middle of a discussion with Luo Jin. Behind Director Zhang stood a large crowd of reporters with cameras at the ready, prompting Xiao Cheng to ask directly what was going on. The man introduced himself as Zhang Xiaoyang, the director of the Wildlife Rescue Center, and greeted Xiao Cheng with a polite but strained smile. He explained that the city had rescued an injured South China tiger that morning and that they had already stabilized its condition. This tiger was a symbol of great respect, and after public deliberation and approval from the city officials, everyone agreed that his zoo was the most suitable place for it, so he asked Xiao Cheng to take the animal in. As he spoke, the staff behind him were already pushing forward a large transport cage on a wheeled stretcher. Inside lay a massive tiger, nearly 2.5 meters long including its tail, its body almost entirely covered in bandages. Xiao Cheng's eyes narrowed instantly, filled with a mixture of shock and sudden, intense excitement because of what he saw. The aura above the tiger's head was glowing green, meaning the beast was currently in a state where a contract could be formed. Normally, a tiger is far more powerful than a wolf, which usually displays a yellow or reddish aura to his eyes. A healthy tiger would possess a deep red aura, making it absolutely impossible for him to form a contract with it. Now, however, he had a chance to form a high-level contract. Perhaps the tiger sensed that only he could save its life. Using his mystical medical knowledge, he could sense that the tiger was barely clinging to life, with only half a breath remaining. He shot a cold look at Director Zhang, realizing the man was trying to hand him a black pod, a disaster to take the blame for. He glanced at the swarm of media lenses behind the director. He knew that if he refused to accept the tiger now, he would face immediate public backlash, and if the tiger died elsewhere, the blame would still find its way to him. He would be condemned by everyone, and at the very least, he would never be able to use his title as an ancestral beast tamer again. He decided he would settle the score for this setup later. For now, he had a more pressing matter to attend to. He stepped quickly toward the cage, where he could faintly feel the tiger's profound despair and its overwhelming fear of death. Xiao Cheng addressed Director Zhang, noting that while his zoo could provide the necessary environment, he currently lacked the required permits. He pointed out that keeping a first-class protected animal without a breeding license might be against the rules, but the director simply waved this off. The director argued that rules are flexible and reminded him that Qinggan Zoo had plenty of experience with large mammals in the past. He promised that if the tiger was well cared for, the approval for a first-class license would surely follow in short order. Deep down, Xiao Cheng sneered at how well the man could paint a pretty picture, yet he agreed that helping the city was his duty. It was their responsibility and duty, of course, but since these were forbidden creatures, they decided it was best not to let the media or any outsiders disturb them. Upon hearing this, Director Zhang's face lit up with a relieved, almost excessive smile, and he quickly agreed to the request. To be honest, the director couldn't wait to leave the scene and wash his hands of the entire situation as quickly as possible. If the tiger died here, the blame would rest solely on the zoo, and so, the massive beast was wheeled inside the gates. We see him temporarily arrange a spot for the tiger in the snake house, closing the doors to prepare for the contract ritual. The tiger's injuries were severe, so much so that he wouldn't have dared this if he hadn't reached the middle stage of his cultivation. He whispered a quiet promise of a new life to the beast, then slowly reached his hand through the bars of the cage. As his palm touched the tiger's forehead, a surge of spiritual energy began to flow, covering the animal's head like a shroud. A connection began to form, though even with a green aura, this contract was proving far more difficult than any before it. The process took longer than the contracts for Wenxi and Hechuan combined, until finally, their minds were perfectly linked. He gently stroked the tiger's head, and the great beast narrowed its eyes, seemingly finding a moment of comfort in his touch. Next, he took out 1 spirit awakening pill and 2 beast spirit pills, placing them carefully near the tiger's mouth. Despite being at death's door, the tiger showed a flicker of excitement and used its tongue to take the pills from his hand. The 2 beast spirit pills were incredibly potent tonics, and as they dissolved, their power began to circulate through the tiger's body. With the energy spreading within, the tiger's fading life was finally stabilized. The immediate danger had passed, for now. By combining the pills with his own profound medical techniques to treat the external wounds, the tiger quickly began to regain its spirit. Suddenly, a deep and steady voice echoed within his mind, simply saying, "Master." Chao Cheng asked how it felt, and the tiger replied that it felt much better, never having expected to actually survive. He decided that from this day forward, the beast would be known as Pujuan. A tiger's name should naturally be domineering and brave, and Pujuan thanked his master for the honor. Out of curiosity, we see him ask the tiger if it knew just how rare its species actually was. Pujuan managed to struggle to his feet, admitting he had rarely seen others of his own kind. However, he mentioned that during his previous time in captivity, he had seen one other tiger with the same bloodline, prompting Chao Cheng to ask where he had been held. By human reckoning, he had been imprisoned for about a year, though he didn't know the exact location. He only remembered a jungle and a river, and that the people there spoke differently than his master. It seemed they spoke an entirely different language, a detail that gave Chao Cheng pause. He wondered if they were foreigners, but Pujuan believed that if his cultivation grew strong enough, he would eventually be able to find his way back to that place. Even though Pujuan sent this message through a mental link, a distinct surge of killing intent was felt behind the words. It was clear those people had mistreated him terribly, so Chao Cheng encouraged him to focus on his cultivation. He promised that once Pujuan was strong enough, he would take him back to claim his revenge. After sharing the cultivation technique, he explored Pujuan's path, discovering it was a way of cultivation fueled by slaughter. The first thing that came to his mind was a sense of destiny, so he patted the cage and told the beast to rest well. His medical skills were powerful, but they couldn't perform miracles instantly. Pujuan's injuries were simply too severe for a quick fix. With Pujuan suffering from more than 4 or 5 major wounds, recovery would take time. An hour later, the next chapter of this ordeal began. Chao Cheng received a call from Song Xinjia, who informed him that the city had held an emergency meeting regarding his reception of the tiger. He was told to prepare himself, as the city's rescue and law enforcement teams were on their way to clear the area. He couldn't help but feel a certain admiration as Song Taizhan and the city leaders arrived with their medical team, and he welcomed them openly. After all, he had already prepared a performance for them, and without finishing this act, he knew the tiger could never truly stay. He played his part perfectly, looking at the crowd and asking what exactly was going on here. Song Taizhan, being the one most familiar with him, stepped forward to handle the introductions and bridge the gap. He introduced a man named Yang Xinhai, the deputy mayor, who had come to oversee the situation personally. It seems the deputy mayor was taking no chances, leading the team himself on this particular day. They had brought along experts from the South China Tiger Protection Center, as well as a full medical group. Yang Xinhai stepped forward and took Chao Cheng's hand in a firm, professional handshake. He thanked Chao Cheng for allowing the tiger to rest there and for helping the city resolve such a difficult problem. However, because the tiger was of such great importance, the medical experts still needed to conduct their own examination. The deputy mayor urged him to lead the way inside. In their minds, they saw him quite differently than he saw himself. To them, he was an innocent victim kept in the dark, and they felt they had to rush to save the animal before it was too late. Of course, they couldn't simply tell him to move aside because director Zhang had framed him. They couldn't just say they were there to save his skin, but even though he knew the whole story, he felt a strange surge of emotion. He realized that by taking this action, the city was essentially taking the responsibility back onto their own shoulders. If the tiger died on the operating table now, the city would be the ones to carry the blame, not him. Agreeing to the plan, he told them the tiger was inside and led the group directly into the snake enclosure without further delay. The medical team from the South China Tiger Protection Center hurried inside, their footsteps echoing with urgency. We see the tiger lying motionless on its side, exactly where it had been left on the ambulance stretcher. The white bandages were now completely soaked in crimson, and everyone's heart sank at the sight of it. Many in the group glanced at Chao Cheng, thinking this young owner had truly run into some terrible luck. And yet, beneath their concern, many were secretly surprised by what they found. This young man was the very same hero who had helped take down that major human trafficking ring. He looked incredibly young as the crowd of medical experts began setting up their equipment for the rescue. Chao Cheng, playing his part perfectly, feigned confusion and remarked that this seemed like a very large operation for a simple checkup. He told the officials that while the tiger's condition was poor when it arrived, he had things under control. He explained that his ancestors were beast tamers and he had used a few family remedies to treat the animal. He claimed the tiger should be fine now, though the medical experts looked at him as if he were a complete fool. The city leaders shared a moment of awkward silence, privately sighing at what they saw as a naive young man. They wondered what nonsense he was talking about, doubting any folk remedy could actually save a dying tiger. To be honest, they knew if the tiger died there, he would be held responsible. These experts were actually there to save him. One expert from the center turned to Yang Xinhai and warned the deputy mayor that the situation looked grim. He stated they could only do their best, a comment that served as a direct rebuttal to Chao Cheng's optimism. They prepared the sedatives and opened the cage, fully exposing the tiger to the gathered crowd. Just as one of the experts stepped forward to administer the sedative, something entirely unexpected happened. The tiger's eyes suddenly snapped open, and with a powerful twist of its body, it sat straight up. The expert holding the needle let out a terrified scream and fell backward, completely losing his composure. Even the city leaders standing in the distance didn't dare to move as the tiger slowly looked around at everyone present. To their utter disbelief, it stood up slowly, opened its massive jaws, and let out a thunderous roar that shook the room. The expert who had just claimed the situation was grim turned pale, his face draining of all color in an instant. This tiger didn't look like it was dying at all, and just as the crowd was about to lose their wits from fear, we see Chao Chung step through the crowd toward the beast, moving calmly under the shocked gazes of everyone there. He reached out to pet the tiger's head and told it to lie down. The tiger instantly quieted and lowered its hindquarters. It actually obeyed, slowly lying back down and allowing him to stroke its massive head without any resistance whatsoever. The beast even closed its eyes in enjoyment, while Yang Xinhai and the other leaders finally began to snap out of their shock. They couldn't believe their eyes. This young man was actually petting a tiger right in front of a massive crowd. The king of the jungle was now as docile as a house cat, and Chao Chung turned to the experts, telling them it was fine. He offered to hold the tiger down while they continued, leaving the city leaders and the breeding center experts completely stunned. They were utterly speechless, wondering if the issue was really about whether he could hold the animal down or not. We see Yang Xinhai crouching slightly, calling out to the young man in a frantic, hushed whisper. He urged Boss Chao to hurry and close the cage immediately, while Chao Chung looked at the surrounding experts with feigned confusion. He asked if they were sure they didn't need to finish the exam, but they begged him to just lock the cage first. The moment the cage was securely fastened, it seemed as though everyone's soul finally returned to their bodies. Some slumped over while others collapsed to the floor in relief. To be honest, the experience had been absolutely terrifying for them. It was then that Song Taizhan stepped forward to ask the one question that was on everyone's mind. He asked if this was just a final burst of energy before the end, but Chao Chung simply offered a small smile. He reminded Uncle Song that while the others didn't know his beast-taming skills, the older man should have some idea of his abilities. He explained that since large mammals possess higher intelligence, they were actually much easier for him to tame. He added that his grandfather had taught him extensively about healing great beasts, and Song Taizhan nodded in immediate understanding. The older man turned toward Yang Xinhai, remarking that the youth was truly a rare talent in this world. To be honest, his actions that day certainly earned him the title of an extraordinary individual. We must remember that the tiger had been delivered to the zoo less than an hour and a half ago. He had taken a creature on the brink of death and restored it until it could stand and roar with power. It seemed like something out of a fairy tale, especially considering how the tiger reacted to him. The beast was as docile as a kitten. Even a legendary elixir could hardly have produced a more miraculous result. Chao Chung humbly deflected the praise, noting that there were too many people present and the tiger was becoming startled. He suggested the experts leave so the animal could rest, and the leader quickly agreed to clear the area. He hurriedly signaled for everyone to withdraw, seeing as the tiger had already been successfully treated. There was no longer any reason for such a massive crowd to remain gathered in the enclosure. After seeing the leaders off, the reality of the situation set in. The tiger now belonged entirely to his zoo. His sect's reputation flourished as he connected with the spirit beast, gaining 3 points of prestige. By showcasing the mysterious methods of the beast-taming sect to the officials, his prestige increased by another 5. He was delighted, knowing more rewards were coming, but he soon learned something interesting from Song Xinjia. It turns out the idea to send the dying tiger to him had actually come from the owner of Green Forest Zoo. It seemed his success had stolen their business, sparking a deep resentment. He immediately pulled out his phone. He searched for information on Green Forest and found they were celebrating their 20th anniversary in 3 days. The event featured a food street and all-day circus performances, with tickets discounted by 20%. For just 280, visitors could enjoy the food street and every circus performance. He couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. A celebration then? He decided he simply had to join the fun, especially since they had sent him such a generous gift earlier. It was only fair that he return the favor with a grand gesture of his own, so he turned back toward the management office. As he reached the crow tree, we see Tong Anshi in the middle of a live stream, wearing a striking black dress that matched her surroundings. The dark crows circling around her created a powerful visual impact, and as she began to dance, the scene became truly mesmerizing. The birds swirled around her in a frantic, rhythmic motion, making for a perfectly framed moment for her online audience. Viewers kept asking where she was, and Tong Anshi took every opportunity to mention she was at the Chingan Zoo. Right then, a notification chimed. His sect's prestige had increased by 1, bringing the total to 70 points. This milestone unlocked a new reward, the Hard Soul Tree, along with a specialized beast-taming technique. The technique allowed him to condense hard soul insects to possess animals, granting him brief control over them while boosting their abilities. In this context, animals referred to any creature that wasn't already bound to him by a formal contract. He gave a satisfied nod toward the hard-working Tong Anchi before heading inside. By noon, a new visitor had arrived. Professor Huang from the Agricultural University Research Institute had come in person to apologize for his students' earlier behavior. He even offered to pay for the privilege of conducting research there, showing a level of sincerity that was hard to ignore. However, Chao Cheng simply shook his head, noting that the old man was prioritizing his work despite battling terminal cancer. He admitted he admired the professor's academic passion, even going so far as to apologize just to study some crows. He gave a thumbs up to show his respect, but then his tone shifted. He pointed out that the man only had a month to live. He noted that while the professor was willing to die for science, dying at the zoo would cause quite a mess for everyone else. His words were blunt, to say the least, leaving everyone present staring at Professor Huang in absolute shock. But what shocked them even more was the professor's own reaction. His eyes widened, his face pale with disbelief. After finishing his business, Chao Cheng couldn't be bothered to deal with them any further and simply turned back toward the zoo. Professor Huang remained the most bewildered of all, telling himself it was impossible since his last checkup showed nothing. When the professor voiced his doubts, those standing around let out a collective sigh of relief, thinking it was all a mistake. They whispered that Boss Chow had gone too far, even if he wouldn't accept an apology. Cursing the old man was quite unnecessary. Professor Huang sighed, shook his head in disappointment, and led his students away from the park entrance. We returned to the interior of the park, where Chao Cheng arrived at the monkey enclosure, home to 5 adult macaques. He told the monkeys it was time to stop idling and start working as he began to channel the power of the hard soul tree. 5 glowing insects materialized in his palm, and with a gentle breath, he sent them drifting toward the animals. The tiny creatures flew to each of the 5 macaques, vanishing directly into the space between their eyes. He promptly opened the cage door and gave the order to work. Surprisingly, the monkeys immediately began grabbing tools like brooms. Some picked up sacks, others grabbed cleaning cloths, and one even balanced a water basin with practiced ease. They scurried over to the ticket booth, where the monkey with the cloth carefully rinsed it clean in the water. With a few quick leaps, it reached the roof of the booth and began scrubbing vigorously until the cloth grew dark with dirt. The clever creature even knew to rinse the cloth again before continuing its work, a level of hygiene we rarely see in primates. One might wonder if these monkeys had truly become spirits, especially the one dragging a sack to collect fallen leaves. Tong Anchi watched the scene in a daze, until Wency, her assistant, urged her to snap out of it and start filming. The drone took flight with renewed energy, capturing every detail of the bizarre cleaning crew for the world to see. Tong Anchi immediately logged into the live stream, changing the title to announce that today there would be no deliveries. As soon as the monkey spring cleaning stream went live, the viewer count surged past 10,000, and the chat exploded with excitement. Gifts began to flood the screen as fans celebrated the return of Brother Chow, having waited a long time for this update. The title Monkey Spring Cleaning left everyone wondering, as Wency hovered the camera drone directly in front of Tong Anchi. We see Tong Anchi appearing on screen in a flowing black dress, with a single crow perched calmly on her shoulder. She joked to the viewers that since the boss wasn't home, it was time to cause some trouble, while Wency took flight. As the lens turned toward the monkeys diligently cleaning, the chat section immediately descended into absolute madness. Fans marveled at the famous influencer Tong Anchi, joking that Boss Chow had somehow managed to recruit a 1 million follower star. But then the focus shifted. People couldn't believe their eyes, questioning if the monkeys were actually performing manual labor. It wasn't just the monkeys. Even the crows weren't resting, proving this zoo was far from ordinary with hundreds of birds involved. The crows swirled around the base of the trees, flying low to the ground to clear away fallen leaves and dry twigs. Every bit of small trash, from plastic bags and scrap paper to fruit pits, was systematically collected by the birds. They carried it all to the nearest bins in a truly spectacular display that, within 15 minutes, drew a massive crowd. The viewer count surged past 100,000, and the screen was soon buried under a constant barrage of digital gift effects. Amidst the excitement, someone recalled the morning news about a critically injured tiger being delivered to the park. They asked to see the South China tiger, prompting Wency to fly the camera drone toward the snake house area. The live stream suddenly revealed a massive steel transport cage, where a tiger wrapped in bandages lay resting. It was sleeping soundly on its bed until Wency used his beak to loudly peck at the bars, shouting for the tiger to wake up. The tiger, rudely awakened from its slumber, let out a low, dissatisfied growl that echoed through the enclosure. The sound was captured so clearly that viewers began scolding the bird, telling it to stop bothering the poor animal. "Keep that thing away from me," Wency shouted, immediately taking flight and circling around him in a panic. The South China tiger continued to grumble and huff at the intruder until Wency finally decided to fly back outside. Just as the audience was getting their fill of the cleaning monkeys, the bird flew back in to pester the tiger again. This playful chaos caused the live stream chat to erupt in a mix of laughter and mock frustration. Compared to the days when we only saw Wency delivering packages, today's broadcast from Chang'an Zoo was incredibly lively, as the massive spring cleaning operation continued throughout the entire afternoon. Meanwhile, Boss Chow had spent the afternoon out on his Delta boat, returning only as the sky began to darken. The monkeys had already retreated to their enclosure for a deep sleep, completely exhausted by their day of labor. Upon checking the back end, he discovered that Tong Anchi's afternoon stream had earned a staggering 360,000 yuan. Their follower count had surged to nearly 2 million, but more importantly, something else had shifted. His sect reputation points had increased by 2 in a single afternoon, bringing the total to 72. He was naturally delighted and began to wonder if he should hire more staff to boost his influence. His goal was to reach 80 points, but the next morning, a particular news report caught his attention. The broadcast reported a major issue upstream, where a massive accumulation of trash was clogging the Manhwa River. The aerial footage was truly shocking, showing a river channel over 50 meters wide completely choked. A carpet of debris stretched for at least 5 kilometers, creating a scene of significant environmental danger. On the upper reaches of the river, Vice Mayor Yang Xinhai was busy directing environmental teams to clear the waterway. Suddenly, someone shouted, and the entire group looked up in the direction they were pointing. We see a dark cloud rolling across the sky, sweeping toward the river with purposeful speed. Yang Xinhai's eyes immediately lit up, as if he recognized exactly what was approaching. It was a flock of about 400 crows, though some onlookers remained confused by their arrival. To be honest, they clearly had no idea just how extraordinary these particular birds were. Without hesitation, the flock of crows dived straight toward the thick layer of trash covering the water. Each crow began to work with surgical precision, either picking up or grabbing pieces of trash from the river's surface. They swiftly took flight, soaring over the woods and wetlands toward the garbage trucks parked along the main road. Like miniature bombers, they released their cargo with a satisfying thud directly into the waiting trucks. In that moment, everyone witnessing the scene, including the numerous media crews on site, was left speechless. It was a sight beyond belief. A flock of crows was actually clearing the river's pollution. Yang Xinhai quickly ordered all the garbage trucks to be grouped together to make it easier for the crows to drop their loads. He demanded more vehicles immediately, his face flushed with excitement as he issued the commands. At this time, we see the live stream transition to a breathtaking high-altitude perspective of the entire operation, whence he was once again providing the view, while a massive raven hovered prominently in the foreground. This raven stayed suspended in the air with powerful wing beats, occasionally diving down toward the others. It would let out a series of sharp caws at the flock, and suddenly, the rhythm of the work changed. Half of the crows descended to the trees in the woods below to begin a scheduled rest period. While the other half continued working, the live chat erupted in a wave of pure disbelief and shock. The viewers were stunned that they understood shift rotations, noting it felt exactly like one of Boss Chow's clever tactics. It wasn't until around 6 o'clock that the working crows finally began their flight back to the zoo. Boss Chow rewarded them by dissolving 2 spirit beast pills, letting the entire flock enjoy a well-earned feast. After that, he sent them back out to work through the night, a cleanup effort that continued without pause. The live stream remained active all night long, and by 8 o'clock the following morning, the results were clear. Over 85% of the trash clogging the Manhwa River had been successfully cleared away. The river, which had been choked for kilometers, was finally clean again, its surface shimmering beautifully in the light. The morning news had already broken, and the citizens were left in a state of absolute shock. Under normal circumstances, a manual cleanup of such a massive scale would have taken at least a month to complete. Meanwhile, over at the Animal Research Institute, Professor Huang was starting to feel a very uncomfortable sensation in his stomach. Seeing his condition, the staff immediately rushed old Huang to the hospital for a thorough examination. The hospital's vice president led old Huang into his office, his voice trembling slightly with emotion as he spoke. He explained that the pathology results for the stomach polyp were in, confirming it had become cancerous, though surgery offered hope. The cure rate was over 90%, but the only real concern now was the professor's advanced age. The surgical risks were relatively high, but the vice president offered to personally perform the operation if he agreed. However, a decision was needed quickly, as there was no telling how fast the cancer might continue to spread. Old Huang seemed to lose himself in thought for a moment, whispering something quietly under his breath. It turned out that this was exactly what had been predicted. Then, at 11 o'clock sharp, the Yunhai City Hall held a press conference to report on the specific progress of the river cleanup effort. They announced that just half an hour ago, this critical and difficult task had been successfully completed, thanks entirely to the crows from Qinggan Zoo. This caused Boss Chow and his zoo to become a viral sensation once again. Meanwhile, Boss Chow was busy checking his system rewards for using his beasts to heal the land and benefit the people. By astonishing the government, the reputation of the beast sect had soared, granting him 25 points of prestige. With his sect's prestige now sitting at 97, he couldn't help but feel a surge of quiet satisfaction. It seemed his hard work was finally paying off as he received the Taiha Spirit Garden and a mysterious sword. His eyes lit up at the description of the Taiha spirit garden, which harmonized the energy of heaven and earth. It allowed all living creatures to rest, recover, and thrive, an effect that was particularly potent for his beasts. He took the Void Ring, an artifact that expanded alongside its master's power, and slipped it onto his finger. Upon checking the internal space, he found it to be roughly the size of half a shipping container. As for the Taiha Spirit Garden, activating such a complex formation required him to carefully channel spiritual energy. There was, of course, one crucial detail, the formation's core. One couldn't simply pick up any random stone. At his current level, he couldn't create a core from nothing, so finding a suitable vessel would require some effort. But now wasn't the time for study. Late that night, he quietly made his way out into the zoo grounds. Circling the entire perimeter, he began the painstaking process of laying down the Taiha Spirit Garden formation. Spiritual energy flowed through his feet into the earth as he measured the boundaries of the array step by step. He traced the intricate patterns into the ground. From high above, the scene looked quite peculiar. We see him walking back and forth along invisible lines, while Wincy and Hwan watched from the eaves, mesmerized. Hwan wondered aloud if their master had developed some sort of repetitive behavioral disorder. To be honest, it looked like it. After 5 long hours of constant movement, the foundation of the Great Formation was finally complete. He returned upstairs, showered, and stood by the window. With a soft clap of his hands, a low hum resonated. The very space within Shingon Zoo trembled slightly, as if a refreshing breeze had suddenly swept through the air. The air itself seemed to grow a bit sweeter, though the immediate effect was admittedly quite subtle. It was roughly equivalent to planting 100 new trees. The area was simply too vast for a stronger effect. With his current cultivation level, this was his limit. Not long after, morning broke over the city of Yunhai. Outside the Green Forest Zoo, the grand celebrations for their 20th anniversary were officially beginning. The circus was a major draw for the crowds, not to mention the promise of a light show and fireworks later. Consequently, the number of visitors arriving at the gates was higher than anything they had ever seen before. Estimates suggested that by the end of the day, total sales would likely surpass 15 million. This had the director, Lin Luming, grinning from ear to ear, though his joy, unfortunately, was destined to be short-lived. He was suddenly informed that a tiger had managed to leap right out of its enclosure. Inside the Green Forest Zoo, things had descended into absolute, unmitigated chaos. A Siberian tiger, nearly 3 meters in length, was roaring as it sprinted wildly through the grounds. Nearby tourists were paralyzed with fear, weeping and begging for their lives. A perfectly reasonable reaction, all things considered. Strangely, the tiger seemed entirely uninterested in the people, focusing instead on its frantic run through the panicked crowds. It eventually took 6 tranquilizer darts before the beast finally slumped over and could be transported back to its pen. A swarm of law enforcement officers arrived with impressive speed, and the scene was quickly brought under control. Luming finally let out a long breath of relief. By some miracle, there hadn't been a single casualty. The bad news, however, was that the internet was already flooded with videos that no amount of PR could hide. Demands for refunds began to echo loudly across the entrance of the Green Forest Zoo. Luming began to suspect, quite bitterly, that there were more people shouting for refunds than there were actual ticket holders. As the relevant authorities reacted with lightning speed, Luming had no choice but to accept his disastrous fate. He opened a dedicated channel to begin the grueling process of processing every single refund request. Between the looming safety inspections and the massive fines, the poor man was practically on the verge of tears. He simply couldn't understand why the tiger would suddenly go mad and attempt to charge through the crowds. It was then that Luming noticed something peculiar, a lone raven perched on a distant tree branch. He realized it was him. To Luming, that raven had become a clear and unmistakable omen of his rival. Most importantly, he knew they had a grudge, ever since he had given Director Zhang that particular piece of advice. Luming roared in fury, demanding that the dying tiger be sent to Chao Che immediately. He slammed his fist against the wall, realizing with a bitter certainty that his suspicions had been correct all along. And indeed, Che had used a raven to deliver a soul-controlling insect, forcing the tiger to charge at the crowd. Of course, he made sure the tiger wouldn't actually hurt anyone, otherwise, the animal's life would be forfeit. His goal was simply to crush the Green Forest Zoo's reputation and ensure Luming never dared to cross him again. That afternoon, the construction company arrived to set up the tiger enclosure, and Che watched the installation closely. The system promptly updated, noting that the Pine Gate Zoo's enclosures had increased, even if this one was a bit simple. It was a start, at least. His reputation points increased by 1, bringing the Pine Gate total to 98. Che felt more motivated than ever. While live streaming was a good way to make money, he knew there were better ways to grow. To truly raise his reputation, he needed to focus on the zoo itself, which meant acquiring more animals and more staff. The following day, he had Zhang Wei draft several labor contracts, preparing to begin a recruitment drive via livestream. But just before going live, he stumbled upon a video that caught his eye and changed his plans entirely. Outside the Green Forest Zoo, about 20 people were holding banners, calling it a trash zoo and demanding their unpaid wages. They were protesting malicious layoffs and stolen sweat and blood. Che's eyes narrowed as he saw his opportunity. He immediately took way and headed straight for the Green Forest Zoo, hoping to recruit these experienced workers for himself. To his surprise, they weren't interested. They admitted Boss Che had talent with animals, but running a business was different. One worker explained that they were looking for a job with more room for growth, a fair point, in a way. Another was even more blunt, admitting they simply didn't see much of a future for his small zoo before apologizing. One by one, they turned him down. It seemed his warm enthusiasm had been met with a rather cold shoulder. He had wanted them because they were veterans who knew the environment, but it appeared he would have to look elsewhere. He had two reasons for wanting them. They were veterans who could start immediately, and he felt responsible for their plight after his revenge on Looming. Since his actions had led to these innocent employees being laid off, hiring them felt like the right way to make amends for their lost jobs. It was meant to be a win-win, but as it turned out, none of them thought much of his small, struggling zoo. However, we see that one person still had a keen eye for potential, a pleasant-looking young woman named Wen. She was a certified veterinarian, and a vet was exactly what Che needed most at the moment. He wasted no time in getting to the point. When he asked about her previous salary, she offered to show her records of $9,000 a month, but he simply paused to think for a moment. He offered her $15,000 a month instead. She was stunned, asking him to repeat the figure, $15,000 for a standard 8 to 6 shift. The deal included 2 days off a week, 5 times pay on holidays, and full benefits. To be honest, it was an offer almost too good to refuse. Maine stood there with her mouth agape for a long time, eventually asking if he didn't need to test her professional skills first. Che simply smiled without saying a word. In truth, he only needed her for that veterinary license. If there was a disease she couldn't treat, he could easily handle it himself. There was no need for a test. Upon returning to the zoo, he introduced her to Luo Jing. He presented Maine as their new vet, mentioning she had been unfairly let go by the Green Forest Zoo's owner. He then introduced Luo Jing as their financial manager, the one who kept the books balanced and the gears turning. He pointed out Tong Anchi and Mei Wuxia from the livestream, as well as Zhang Wei, the head of their legal department. Maine smiled warmly and shook hands, feeling a bit more at ease as the team welcomed her to the fold. Che told her they would sign the formal contract as soon as the legal team returned, and Maine nodded in agreement. Luo Jing, being naturally outgoing, sensed Maine's slight awkwardness and offered to take her on a tour of the grounds. Maine thanked her, and the two of them headed into the park, chatting and laughing as they went. While they explored, Che made his way toward the tiger enclosure to check on his most recent addition. He found Anchi there, already starting a live stream, which immediately caused quite a stir among the online viewers. The chat was flooded with comments about Boss Chow being lazy again, with some fans jokingly asking Anchi to just film him instead. He told the viewers that the tiger was doing much better, inviting them to follow his camera for a closer look. It was time to remove the bandages. After saying his piece, he reached out and took the phone from Anchi's hand. As he opened the door and stepped into the enclosure, the livestream chat absolutely exploded with panic and disbelief. They couldn't believe he was just walking in there for a zero-distance encounter, a move that was, quite frankly, terrifying to watch. Some fans joked about being scared to death, suggesting he should at least wear a bulletproof vest before entering the tiger's den. He calmly told the audience to remember this tiger's name, Pajuan. As he spoke, the massive beast began to move. Pajuan started trotting directly toward him, and we can imagine the viewers at home holding their breath in pure terror. In their eyes, it looked like the tiger was about to pounce and go for his throat at any second. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of attacking, the tiger reached him and affectionately rubbed its massive head against his leg like a giant house cat. He gave Pajuan a gentle pat on the head and gestured for the tiger to lie down on its side on the ground. Pajuan obeyed instantly, rolling over to expose his belly, allowing Che to begin unwinding the bandages from his paws. We see that the wounds had almost entirely healed, with healthy new flesh already growing over the old injuries. Under the watchful eye of the camera, he carefully snipped away the head bandages, slowly revealing the tiger's face. A terrifying scar ran across the corner of the eye, which now appeared to be a striking, ghostly white. The chat immediately wondered if he was blind. The viewers felt a wave of pity for the poor tiger, though some couldn't help but notice how incredibly cool he looked. Che himself was pleasantly surprised. The eye had clearly suffered a massive trauma during the tiger's previous hardships. However, he knew the tiger wasn't actually blind. Pajuan had already told him that he could still see through that eye. He had used his special vision to confirm that, aside from a thin, faint mist, the tiger's sight was almost entirely unaffected. Still, he hadn't expected that once the eye healed, it would turn into such a hauntingly beautiful shade of white. Looking at both eyes from the front, we have to admit he looks incredibly cool, so Che told the tiger to get up and run a few laps. After confirming there were no more external injuries, he reached out and gave Pajuan's backside a playful, firm slap. Pajuan immediately stood up, shook his massive head, and began to stroll around the enclosure, which suddenly felt much smaller. That harmless, almost domestic appearance had the viewers in the livestream chat begging for a chance to see the tiger up close. He eventually left the enclosure and handed the phone back to Tong Anchi, who was still standing there in a state of complete shock. The The fans joked about the old saying that you should never touch a tiger's behind. Apparently, Boss Chow missed that memo. He was just a bit too calm, as if he had raised this tiger from a cub, and with that, he turned to walk away. When Tong Anchi looked at the livestream stats again, she saw that the number of viewers had nearly doubled in just those few minutes. Time passed quickly, and by noon, Zhang Wei arrived at the scene leading a large group of people from outside. They all looked like university students, both men and women, and they seemed quite excited the moment they saw Che. Zhang Wei stepped forward and whispered his report, telling the boss that he had found all 20 people as requested. When asked if they were poor, Zhang Wei confirmed they were, so poor, in fact, that they barely had 2 coins to rub together. However, these students all had excellent reputations for their character, and their academic performance was equally impressive. Most of them were already working while studying, and some had even received poverty grants. It was a job well done by Zhang Wei. Che nodded in approval, but Zhang Wei quickly added one more thing, calling out to him with a bit of hesitation. He explained that he had also brought his 3 roommates along, as they were the ones who had helped him investigate the candidates. Upon hearing there was work available here, they insisted on trying out, even though they weren't exactly struggling financially. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they could be considered as coming from perfectly average, ordinary families. Zhang Wei assured him their character was beyond reproach, then swallowed nervously, waiting for a reaction. He seemed terrified that the boss might be angry, but Che simply gave a light chuckle and told him it was perfectly fine. Che looked at him and asked how he could possibly reject his own legal department's connections when he was hiring strangers. It was a matter of respect, after all. He gave Zhang Wei a playful nudge on the chest, and for a moment, the young man felt a lump of gratitude forming in his throat. This was exactly why he followed the boss so loyally. And then, Che turned to the group, introducing himself as Chao Cheng. He explained he was the owner of the zoo and that Zhang Wei had likely already mentioned why they were all invited here today. From security and cleaning to ticket sales, animal care, and logistics, we see that he was currently short-staffed in every single department. However, the one thing he didn't lack was a budget for benefits, and he made it clear that this applied to every single position available. The base salary for everyone started at 10,000, with adjustments based on the difficulty of the role, plus full insurance and a housing fund. He promised triple pay on public holidays and 1 day off per week, which they could choose to take any day except the busy weekends. The hours were 8 to 6 with overtime pay and separate bonuses. He then invited anyone interested in a role to stay and apply. Those who weren't interested wouldn't leave empty-handed either, as he offered 200 for travel expenses if they chose to walk away right then. As he finished speaking, the students stood there in complete disbelief. 10,000 a month just to guard a gate, plus full benefits? Overtime pay and triple wages? To be honest, it sounded nothing like the corporate scripts they were used to hearing in the real world. Usually, they were told to be grateful for unpaid internships and opportunities for growth while working for free in the name of experience. For these struggling students, such an offer felt less like a job interview and more like a direct path to a much better life. Suddenly, the air was filled with voices as every single student eagerly raised their hands, shouting their willingness to stay and work. Not a single person turned to leave, so, with a satisfied nod, Che told Zhang Wei to bring out the contracts for immediate signing. We see him leading the excited group toward the administration hall, with the students buzzing in a state of collective euphoria. This was the kind of interview they wouldn't even dare to dream of, signing a contract on the spot without a single hoop to jump through. In any other situation, an offer this good might have seemed like a trap, but here, it felt like they had finally caught a lucky break. By the end of the session, 24 people had joined the staff, concluding with the final signature from a student named Wen Main. At that moment, our protagonist's system finally flickered to life, announcing that he had gained 24 sect disciples and 24 points of sect prestige. The rewards were substantial, a full year of cultivation, along with 3 one-glance pills and 3 brilliant hue pills. Che's eyes lit up, as these were 2 types of medicine he had never seen before. The one-glance pill was specifically for fierce animals to consume. It could greatly enhance their reproductive capabilities with a single use, making it incredibly easy for them to conceive offspring. As for the brilliant hue pill, once an animal took it, their physical appearance and spirit would be permanently revitalized and enhanced. For a zoo owner, the one-glance pill was nothing short of a divine miracle drug, a true game-changer for his conservation efforts. His first thought immediately jumped to the giant pandas, but he quickly caught himself and laughed at his own momentary lapse in logic. Why was he worrying about pandas when he had South China tigers? Currently, the level of endangerment for pandas simply couldn't compare. The South China tigers were in a far more precarious position, so he naturally decided to prioritize his own contracted spirit beasts first. Of course, he had no intention of letting the pandas miss out either. He told himself he would eventually get around to them as well. Once the contracts were signed, Zhang Wei took the initiative to lead the group, offering to show everyone around the park grounds. The large crowd followed him out in high spirits, while Luo Jing was eager to start learning new things from the newly hired accountant. She called out to Wen Main to join her as they departed. Just as the crowd vanished, Song Xinjia's name flashed on Che's phone screen. The voice on the other end was casual as Song asked if he was free, mentioning that a new Forestry Bureau director had just been appointed. The new official wanted to pay the zoo a visit, but was worried about being turned away at the door or receiving a cold shoulder. Che couldn't help but chuckle at the idea of someone sent to scout the situation beforehand. This new forestry head was certainly being cautious. To be honest, there was no reason for a new appointee to fear the baggage left behind by his predecessor's complicated reputation. He told Song to bring him over, knowing it was vital to maintain a good relationship with the department that oversaw his entire operation. Since he was free, he suggested they come over immediately and even invited them to stay for a hot pot lunch at the zoo. The conversation then shifted to the growing problem of wild boars destroying farmland and the prohibitively high costs of hiring professional hunting teams. Aside from a few large-scale contractors, ordinary farmers simply couldn't afford the protection they needed, leaving the mountain villagers in a state of misery. Che immediately thought of Pajun. Using a predator to stop the thieves seemed like a perfect and quite logical opportunity for a hunt. He wondered how many live chickens it would take to match the cultivation benefits of taking down a single wild boar. He told them it was simple. He would just let the South China tigers from the park take a little trip to solve the problem. Song looked at him as if he'd had too much to drink, asking if he'd ever heard the phrase releasing the tiger back to the mountain. Che assured him the tigers were more obedient than he was, while Zhou Yishan listened, breaking into a cold sweat at the suggestion. Zhou stammered, reminding him that these were South China tigers, an extremely endangered species, and that this might not be the best idea. He added that they should probably respect the tiger's own wishes, though Che just chuckled, knowing exactly what the beast would want. To prove his point, Che stood up and waved for the others to follow him as he headed straight for the exit. As they walked outside, Zhou Yishan couldn't help but feel that the entire situation was becoming increasingly absurd. We see the group arrive at the tiger enclosure, where Che tapped on the glass and told the tiger that the mountain boars were causing chaos. He asked the tiger plainly if it wanted to go out and take them down, leaving Zhou Yishan convinced that Che had truly lost his mind. Zhou wondered why he didn't just use a translation app, as it would be a miracle if the tiger could actually understand such a request. But in the very next second, the impossible happened. The tiger's eyes widened, and it let out a thunderous, commanding roar. It began pacing back and forth with sudden energy, nodding its massive head repeatedly, leaving Zhou Yishan completely stunned. He turned to Che, stammering and asking what on earth was happening with the animal. Che explained that the tiger was simply excited to go hunt some boars, though Zhou still struggled with the idea of a South China tiger doing such a thing. Che told Zhou to trust him, noting that the tiger had quite a temper. If he wasn't allowed to go, he would surely start causing trouble right here. He even joked that the tiger might get so upset it would collapse and foam at the mouth, a statement followed by 3 seconds of stunned silence. Seeing their disbelief, Che pointed at Zhou Yishan and shouted to the tiger that this was the man who wouldn't let him go hunting. In that very moment, Pajun kicked his legs, collapsed to the ground, and began twitching with foam at his mouth, a truly shocking sight. The onlookers were frozen in panic, completely lost as to how such a dramatic turn of events could happen so suddenly. Zhou Yishan and Song Xingjie looked as if they'd seen a ghost, frantically asking Brother Chow what on earth was going on. Che simply spread his hands in a helpless gesture, reminding them that he'd warned them about the tiger's temper if he didn't get his way. He claimed he had no solution, leaving Zhou Yishan wondering if he was trapped in some bizarre, alcohol-induced fever dream. Desperate, Zhou shouted that he would approve the request, while Che tapped on the glass to tell the tiger the good news. The tiger immediately stopped twitching, wiped the foam from its mouth, and stood back up as if nothing had happened. Naturally, Zhou Yishan eventually left, his mind clouded with worry. He had come to build a relationship and ask for advice on the wild boars. Instead of solving the problem, he felt as though he had just inherited a massive, striped headache. He took his concern straight to Mayor Bai Hatong, who could hardly believe that a tiger had actually suffered a seizure. Zhou nodded solemnly, confirming it was a severe fit, which prompted Bai Hatong to pick up the phone and start making calls immediately. We moved to the following morning at 7 o'clock, where every single employee had already arrived at the Qinggan Zoo. After their dinner the night before, where the manager of a luxury hotel had treated them with the highest level of hospitality, these students realized that such respect was entirely due to Boss Che's influence and reputation. This made them treasure their jobs even more. Though their shift started at 8, they were eager to start much earlier. Since the zoo still had very few animals, there wasn't much to do, but they were determined to find work regardless. They essentially became a collective cleaning crew, scouring the grounds for any task to improve their new work environment. Around 7:30, Che received a mental message from Hchuan, informing him that they had finally gathered enough subjects. With 32 animals ready, Che was delighted and told them to start heading back slowly toward their location. He warned them not to enter the city yet, then immediately pulled out his phone to call Song Xingjie. Che called Old Song, asking him to leak a specific story to the media. A mysterious magnetic field at Qinggan Zoo was causing a strange crow riot. His plan was simple. With the media as witnesses, he would let all the animals enter the zoo of their own accord. 20 minutes later, reporters from various online platforms, the Yunhai Daily, and even official outlets like Sannong Zaishin arrived. They swarmed Chingan Zoo, where a massive flock of crows had already been circling and screeching for 20 minutes. The scene was truly overwhelming, with reporters shouting, "Boss Che, can you tell us what's happening with these ravens? Boss Che." They clamored to know if there were other abnormalities and begged to be let inside. Everyone was talking at once in a chaotic frenzy. Microphones were shoved forward so aggressively that if Che hadn't stepped back quickly, he might have been poked right in the mouth. He explained that the ravens had been acting strangely since morning, but he claimed he had no idea what the actual cause was. He shouted for everyone to clear the entrance and stop crowding the gate. But just then, someone spotted something in the distance. A loud cry went up as a massive cloud of dust rose from the wasteland near the mountains, signaling something fast approaching. It seemed as though wild beasts were charging toward them. One even looked like the legendary Sabuxiang, or mila deer. There were Chinese suro, tufted deer, and even a pair of peculiar primates that left the crowd wondering if they were monkeys or apes. Everyone began whispering in disbelief, wondering how such a diverse group of animals could have ended up here all at once. As the herd thundered closer, the terrified onlookers scrambled to clear a path, not wanting to be caught in the stampede. The animals reached the main gate of the zoo and began a series of coordinated movements, almost as if they were performing. It was a breathtaking sight, though Che looked at the pile of animals before him and feigned a deep, troubled frown. He complained about the sheer number of them, joking that it wasn't enough for people to block his door. Now the animals were doing it too. Reporters asked which zoo they had escaped from, noting that they seemed to have come directly from the direction of the mountains. Che put on a look of pure confusion, asking why on earth mountain animals would run all the way to his doorstep. Before he could say more, a team from the Research Institute arrived, breathless as they identified the clouded leopards, suro, and binturongs. The researchers were in shock, shouting about Skywalker Hollock gibbons and how every single one was a protected species. We see the utter disbelief on their faces as two of the apes, startled by the noise, suddenly leaped right over the fence. They vanished into Chingan Zoo, followed quickly by smaller, agile creatures like marbled cats and binturongs darting through the bars. Che put on a grand performance, shouting at the top of his lungs, asking who gave them permission to enter his property. He commanded them to stop right there, and miraculously, as if they understood him, the small animals actually froze in their tracks. One reporter, unable to watch any longer, spoke up and told Boss Che to stop scaring the poor creatures. They explained that the forestry department had been contacted and urged him to just let the animals inside for safety. Che scoffed, pointing out that these were top-tier protected wildlife, and he didn't even have the proper Class 1 permits yet. He argued that if anything happened to them on his watch, he'd be the one rotting in prison. Then, a shout announced a new arrival. The leaders from the Forestry Bureau had arrived, with Zhou Yishan leading his team toward the front of the crowd. Even Yishan was taken aback by the massive gathering of animals, pleading with Che to let them inside before they panicked. Che acted as though he were being put in an impossible position, asking Director Zhou why he was making things so difficult. He reminded everyone that any one of these animals was a rare treasure, and he lacked the legal paperwork to house them. He worried aloud about people looking for trouble later, but then, as if on cue, a solution appeared. Yishan pointed out that the staff from the rescue center had just pulled up to the scene. The rescue center's vehicles and personnel arrived at that exact moment. A truly remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say? No one could have guessed that Yishan and Che were essentially performing a rehearsed duet as Yishan began giving orders. He commanded his team to bring the rare animals back to the center, while Che eagerly agreed they should be moved immediately. As the rescue workers moved in, one tried to grab a tufted deer, which sent the poor creature into a terrified frenzy. The deer began bleeding and crashing around wildly, leading Che to shout that they were only making the situation worse. The researchers immediately stepped forward to stop them, but the tufted deer was already in a state of complete panic. It dashed back to the zoo's iron gates, desperately trying to find any gap it could squeeze through to get inside. At this point, even a fool could see the truth. These animals had no intention of going anywhere but Chingan Zoo. One of the researchers turned to Zhou Yishan, noting that since they traveled here as a group, they clearly recognized this as home. They pleaded with Boss Che to open the gates, assuring him that with so many witnesses present, he wouldn't be held liable. Yishan added that with the media watching, he would take full responsibility. The crowd quickly chimed in to support him. They offered to testify on his behalf, arguing that if the animals were this determined to enter, there must be a good reason. As they spoke, the animals began throwing themselves against the fence, creating a chaotic symphony of metallic clanging. And why wouldn't they? Inside, H1 had just crushed the remaining half of a beast spirit pill, releasing its irresistible scent. The aroma was simply too much for the creatures to resist, leading Che to let out a long, weary sigh of resignation. He agreed to take them in for now, but insisted that Director Zhou arrange for the proper authorities to collect them soon. He pointed out that the cost of feeding them was too high, and without Class 1 permits, he refused to break the law. Yishan promised to report the situation immediately, and with that, Che finally swung the great gates open for the waiting herd. A massive wave of animals surged inside, each one appearing more joyful than the last as they rushed toward their new sanctuary. The new employees of Chingon stood there in utter shock, wondering if this was how the zoo usually handled its acquisitions. Che began giving orders to the staff to find places for everyone, all while the official media captured a rather bizarre sight. We see the very same tufted deer that had fought the rescue workers so violently just moments ago suddenly calm down. It was now strolling casually behind a female zookeeper, looking around with a sense of calm curiosity, as if it belonged there. It even stopped to nibble on the greenery, while a clouded leopard darted into a tree, startling a flock of crows into the air. The two Skywalker Hulot gibbons followed suit, immediately claiming a large tree as their own personal lookout point. And just like that, Chingon Zoo became livelier than ever before, though Che noticed the system remained strangely silent. It was likely because these animals didn't truly belong to the park yet. For the better part of the day, the newcomers spent their time familiarizing themselves with their surroundings while Zhou Yishan handled the official matters. He reported the situation immediately to Bai Hetong, who then submitted the case to the Provincial Forestry Department. The leaders of the department were utterly bewildered by the news. By 11:30 that morning, the livestream viewers were struggling to keep up with the chaotic excitement, while Che took a quiet stroll. Suddenly, Huan's voice echoed through his mind, announcing that visitors had arrived, prompting Che to head toward the gate. There, he found Zhou Yishan and Yang Xinhai accompanying a group of distinguished-looking experts waiting at the entrance. Che welcomed them inside as Yishan stepped forward to introduce Professor Ning, a specialist from the provincial level. Ning was the leader of this expert group. As soon as they met, Yang Xinhai took the initiative to introduce every member of the team. Professor Ning appeared to be in his 60s, with graying hair and a pair of scholarly glasses. After the pleasantries, Che led them to study the animals. They observed the rare creatures up close, and by the end of the tour, Professor Ning was visibly moved. Usually, the rare animals he encountered were either critically ill or incredibly aggressive, never this gentle. To have such healthy specimens available for study was a dream. If these animals could settle here permanently, their research value would be immense. As for the funding, the province had specific resources for wildlife rescue and shelter. Ning told Che to write the application, promising to submit it personally. Che was secretly delighted. The fact that the province sent Ning spoke volumes about the professor's influence. If he delivered the application himself, there was no way it would fail. Che thanked him, but Ning insisted that the gratitude belonged to Che instead. Early the next morning, Zhou Yishan arrived at the zoo in person. Zhou Yishan arrived at Chingon Zoo with wonderful news, telling Che that the special compensation funds, both the initial and first monthly payments, had been released. The total came to 3 million yuan, which meant these animals could now legally and officially call the zoo their permanent home. At that exact moment, we see the system notifications finally pop up, confirming the shelter of 32 rare beasts. His sect reputation increased by 20, bringing the total to 142 and unlocking some rather intriguing new rewards. He received the soul-shaking roar and a Jingting black tortoise egg. The soul-shaking roar, as it turns out, is an exclusive technique for beasts of the white tiger lineage, allowing their roar to physically intimidate the very souls of others. As for the Jingting black tortoise egg, it was a specialized pet egg that, with careful incubation, would hatch into a magical Jingting black tortoise. Che had to struggle to suppress a laugh, realizing the system had essentially gifted him a literal turtle egg. He thanked Zhou Yishan for his personal assistance, though Yishan modestly insisted he couldn't take all the credit for the success. He noted that Professor Ning had exerted a great deal of influence. After a bit more small talk, Yishan got down to business. Regarding the South China tigers hunting wild boars, the higher-ups had finally agreed, but with one strict condition for the entire process. Che had to be present to supervise personally. The task couldn't be handed off to anyone else. Che agreed, suggesting a further plan. He proposed they register an official guard team for a win-win partnership. He would keep the livestream revenue, and they would gain the prestige. Furthermore, since the South China tigers were now authorized to hunt boars, he inquired about the necessary hunting permit. With a smile, Zhou Yishan pulled a document folder from his bag, which Che accepted with visible delight. Hunting boars wasn't just about letting Pejuan practice his skills. Che himself was looking forward to stretching his own muscles a bit. After Yishan left, Che instructed Tong Anchi to update the stream title to announce Chingon Zoo's official status. The grand opening was set for tomorrow, September 6th. Afterward, he found Luaji and told him to produce a batch of discount cards. He then had an announcement posted. Anyone who had purchased a ticket before today was eligible for a special gift. They could come and collect a permanent discount card, and those holding these cards would enjoy lasting benefits at the park. In the future, these cards would grant discounts on almost every purchase within the zoo. Furthermore, any local resident of Yunhai City would also enjoy a 10% discount on select services at Chingon Zoo. Che announced this news during his afternoon livestream, and his reputation increased twice before the sun had even set. Around 6 in the evening, Che led a team including Song Taizhan and Zhou Yishan toward the Beishan district. Their destination was Baiyang village in Luodong town to hunt wild boars. Only an hour after the official guard team was registered, They received their very first request for help from the people of Bayang village. The reason was simple. Private guard teams were far too expensive, charging 3,000 yuan per acre without any after-sales guarantee. The official team only charged 5,000 and guaranteed a total clearing. At that moment, the village secretary, Zhao Taizhu, and the local farmers watched in stunned silence as Pajuan stepped out of the rescue center's large transport vehicle. None of them dared to even breathe. No one had told them that the guard team's hunting dogs would actually be tigers. The villagers weren't the only ones trembling with fear at the sight of the massive beast. Even Song Taizhan felt his entire body go stiff, his muscles tensing instinctively. It was his first time facing a tiger without any barriers between them. The surrounding law enforcement officers were just as rigid, their bodies as hard as stone from the sheer tension of the moment. They gripped their riot guns tightly, which, to be honest, was the only thing giving them any sense of security. Che told the tiger to run off and stretch his legs. Then he attached a camera to himself. He also strapped cameras onto Wensi and Hwan. Once the tiger was a safe distance away, Song Xinjie finally found the courage to step down from the vehicle carrying a black case containing a portable control console. A screen larger than a standard laptop displayed 3 clear video feeds, all of which were functioning perfectly. Che pulled a long-handled hunting knife from the truck and let out a sharp shout, while the black crow gave a loud cry. The bird soared into the sky, flying toward the distant fields, while Che shouldered his hunting knife. He strode toward the fields as Pajuan let out an excited roar, trotting a few steps to stay by his side. We see a man and a tiger walking together, a scene that was, surprisingly enough, perfectly harmonious. Song Taizhan and Zhou Yishan exchanged a look, both seeing a deep sense of shock in the other's eyes. This very moment was perhaps the most direct symbol of his identity as a true beast tamer. The law enforcement officers were equally horrified. After all, that was a literal tiger. Yet it followed him obediently, leaving the villagers stunned for several minutes until the silence finally broke. Suddenly, Song Xinjie shouted into the radio, calling out to Che that a wild boar had been spotted. It was at his 2 o'clock position, but it started running before he could even finish the warning. The tiger's roar had terrified the boar, which was now fleeing frantically across the thermal imaging screen. Che shouted back to Song Xinjie to keep reporting the coordinates while he began to run. In reality, he shared a telepathic link with Hwan and already knew exactly where the boar was. Asking for radar updates was merely a way to keep up appearances while everyone huddled around the screen. They were amazed by his speed, noting that he was running nearly as fast as the tiger itself. The mountain terrain was rough, but the tiger used its terrifying leaping ability to clear obstacles with ease. Even more impressive was Che, who carried a heavy knife, yet moved through the brush as if on flat ground. On the video feed, he showed no hesitation, meeting up with Hwan in just over 40 seconds. Before Song Xinjie could even speak, Che looked down and spotted the 300-pound wild boar. The beast was currently charging through the fields, crashing through everything in its path. It tore through the sweet potato crops, but Pajuan was already closing in from the side. Leaving behind a series of roars like a revving engine, Pajuan reached the boar's side in a blink and leaped into the air. A single paw slammed into the boar's head, his claws sinking into the flesh like steel hooks. He latched onto the beast, and in an instant, the boar was dragged to the ground, letting out a frantic, guttural squeal. As the boar shrieked in terror, Pajuan bit down hard on the back of its neck. With a powerful tear, he flipped the beast over. Meanwhile, Che didn't hesitate for even a single second. He thrust his blade directly toward the boar's chest, and with a dull thud, the weapon found its mark. The long hunting knife pierced straight through the chest, incredibly skewering the boar on the spot. Song Taizhan felt his eye twitch. If he wasn't mistaken, Che had delivered that strike with just one hand. The boar let out a final, wild howl as Che yanked the blade out, even as the beast tried to struggle one last time. Pajuan brought a heavy paw down across its face with a muffled crack, ending any hope of resistance. The boar's cries stopped abruptly, its skull shattered instantly by the sheer force of the tiger's blow. Zhou Yishan and the others watched in stunned silence. It had all happened so fast, from the moment Pajuan charged. Between the tiger's takedown, the finishing blow, and Pajuan's final strike, the entire encounter took less than 3 seconds. In any normal situation, a standard farm protection team would need much longer to take down a boar this size. It would usually take 10 minutes or more, yet this man and his tiger had essentially achieved an instant kill. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the radio. More boars had been spotted, and this time, it was an entire sounder. They were gathered in a dense cluster on the thermal screen, a family of 12 boars clearly up to no good. Acknowledging the report, Che immediately led Pajuan toward Hwan's position, leaving Song Xinjie completely baffled. The young man had shared the numbers as a warning to retreat, yet Che seemed to be getting more excited. Moving with incredible speed, he reached the destination in minutes. From Wensi's perspective, the hunt was truly beginning. The man and his tiger closed the distance to the sounder with incredible speed as Song Taizhan and Chun Sheng shouted a warning. They yelled that there were simply too many boars and pleaded with Che not to try and be a hero. Safety should have been the priority, but Che didn't seem to hear a single word they said. He shouted excitedly to Pajuan that they would flank them, the tiger taking the left, while he took the right to surround them. With a sudden burst of speed, the tiger lunged toward the left, while Che began his maneuver to the right. At the same time, he quietly activated his soul tree, releasing 6 soul insects with a flick of his hand. The insects flew toward the 6 boars on the right. Even for him, controlling 6 of these massive beasts at once was the limit. Zhou Yishan felt a chill run down his spine as he watched a single man and 1 tiger attempt to surround 12 wild boars. To be honest, it didn't sound like something a sane person would suggest, but what happened next silenced all doubt. The group watched in absolute shock as the South China tiger took center stage. Pajuan charged a 400-pound boar and reared up on his hind legs with terrifying grace. A single paw slammed directly into the boar's face, striking with enough force to stop the beast in its tracks. Half of the creature's face was instantly crushed, the raw power of the blow driving its head violently into the dirt. Without missing a beat, Pajuan lunged at the next boar and delivered another devastating strike. Once again, the impact was lethal, leaving Zhou Yishan and the others staring with wide, disbelieving eyes. The sheer strength required to shatter a boar's skull with 1 blow was staggering, not to mention the tiger's agility. It became clear that when they killed the first boar, this beast hadn't even been trying his hardest. He had merely been warming up, but the scene was about to get even more surreal as Che joined the fray. It was one thing for a tiger to be fast, but Che was easily keeping pace with the fleeing boars on foot. His long hunting knife became a blur of precision. Every time he caught a target, the blade pierced through them effortlessly. The wild boar collapsed and struggled, twisting frantically, making it nearly impossible for any ordinary person to hold on to a hunting knife. And yet, Che gripped the long handle tightly, slicing through the boar's thick hide before pulling the blade out with sheer force. By the time he had finished off this particular boar, the rest of the sounder had already managed to scramble some distance away. He placed a hand to his mouth and let out a sharp, piercing whistle that echoed through the trees. This was, of course, a clever cover for his soul control technique. The boars ahead suddenly felt their legs turn to stone. Carried by their own momentum, they tumbled helplessly to the ground, allowing Che to finish them off one by one. With a few swift thrusts, he took down 5 more boars, a scene that looked like pure magic to Zhou Yishan and the others. It was truly a mysterious sight, a single whistle causing a group of wild boars to collapse simultaneously. The image of a legendary beast tamer's descendant living as a mountain recluse was becoming more vivid in their minds by the second. For more, Song Xinjie shouted, though in reality, nothing could escape the watchful eyes of H1 above. For the next hour, it was essentially a race between man and tiger to see who could cull more boars once the radar locked on. Che and Pajuan moved with incredible speed to reach every target. No matter who arrived first, the result was an instant kill. In just over 2 hours, the pair had successfully eliminated a total of 35 wild boars. Finding over 30 boars in an area of only about 300 acres was a staggering discovery. A density like that is considered a severe disaster, and by now, it was already midnight. At that moment, Che's system chimed in, noting his efforts in clearing low-level demonic beasts from the mortal realm. For maintaining the peace of the local area, his sect's reputation increased by 3, bringing the total to 147. Once the work was done, he had Pajuan hop onto the vehicle and told the group it was time to head back. He reminded them that the zoo opens tomorrow, and upon returning, H1 and Wensi immediately flew down to join him. As they landed on his shoulders, Che made his way toward a large blue enclosure that had previously been used for peacocks. We see that there are no longer any peacocks here, only 2 beautiful pheasants, one a golden pheasant, and the other a Lady Amherst pheasant. The golden pheasant is, of course, the legendary prototype of the divine phoenix. The white-bellied Lady Amherst is even rarer than its counterpart, and both possess stunning plumage. Tomorrow, he would rely on them to ensure a successful opening day. With a flick of his fingers, Che tossed out 2 illusionary color pills. The 2 birds each snatched a pill from the air. After consuming the medicine, they immediately grew drowsy. As they flew into the shaded area of the enclosure, Che wandered around for a bit before finding a quiet spot to sit and meditate. With a simple thought, the crystal-hoofed black tortoise egg from the system appeared in the palm of his hand. The egg was the size of a palm with a dark gold surface. He placed it on the ground, while H1 and Wensi stared at it with wide eyes. They wondered if their master knew how to hatch such a thing, suggesting a tortoise might be needed. Che shook his head, as Wensi looked on with a face full of questions. This crystal-hoofed tortoise, unlike the spiritual beasts he had contracted later, was a natural-born spirit beast, an existence that didn't belong to this world. It was a type of guardian beast. The birds asked what sweet dew was. Rain was a gift from heaven, so perhaps that counted. However, the effect of rain would be poor, as morning dew is best. Che decided this task would fall to H1. He planned to find some mineral water bottles for the birds to carry, leading the ducks up the mountain to collect the morning dew. They would build a small pond and fill it entirely with this pure essence. H1 accepted the order, though he felt the task was quite heavy. Wensi joked that there was a brand of mineral water called Sweet Dew, and wondered if they could just trick the egg with that. He even suggested giving the egg some armor, leaving both Che and Hwan completely speechless. The next day, as the sky began to brighten, a line of vehicles belonging to various city hall officials began to arrive one after another. Leading the way was by Hutong's trusted secretary, bringing along a massive floral wreath and a decorative money tree. Behind him were the secretaries and deputies of other city leaders, all arriving for the grand opening. This was causing quite a stir in Yunhai City, drawing an incredible amount of attention. Just the flower baskets from the city leaders alone lined both sides of the entrance for nearly 30 meters. As the new employees arranged these floral tributes, their hearts were beaming with pride. Che personally greeted the guests, and after seeing off the first wave of secretaries, the day had fully dawned. It was now nearly 7 in the morning, and a crowd of over 100 people was already waiting in line. Since it was a rare chance to see the owner in person, several young girls rushed over with excitement, asking for photos. Some even asked for his autograph, while others greeted him cheerfully, calling out, "Good morning, Boss Zhao." They eagerly asked if they could go in to see the animals yet. Che confirmed they could, announcing that for all Yunhai locals, Chang'an Zoo would offer a permanent 10% discount on all purchases. Naturally, the crowd erupted into a massive cheer. They swarmed toward the ticket booths, while the staff excitedly headed into the park to begin receiving the first visitors. At that moment, we see a large group of people gathering in front of one particular enclosure, whispering in amazement. They marveled at the beauty before them, a glimpse of gold and red. Such vibrant red was rare, and the white was even more so. Inside this enclosure, a golden pheasant stepped out slowly, sporting a brilliant, shimmering golden crest upon its head. Its back and feathers displayed a stunning gradient of gold and red, while the crimson feathers on its chest looked like fine silk. The colors were incredibly vivid, especially the long tail feathers, which shimmered with a magnificent, multicolored brilliance. Meanwhile, the Lady Amherst pheasant stood nearby, its chest as white as jade, and its crest a deep, blood-red crimson. Its back glowed with a gemstone-like azure luster, complemented by tail feathers of elegant black and white. Long and full, the plumage was a sight of pure majesty. Both birds then flew directly onto a large wooden stump. Behind the enclosure stood a tree that provided shade, but a single beam of brilliant sunlight managed to pierce through the leaves. That beam of light fell perfectly onto the center of the stump. The golden pheasant was the first to strut proudly into the light. As the sun hit its feathers, the gold on its head and back instantly erupted into a dazzling, magnificent radiance. At that moment, the Lady Amherst pheasant nudged the other bird aside, claiming the center of the sunlight for itself. As the light hit its feathers, the bird's white plumage glowed with a pure, almost divine radiance. It was truly a sight to behold. The golden pheasant, clearly annoyed at having its spotlight stolen, immediately began to flap its wings in protest. It gave the white bird a sharp bump, and the Lady Amherst pheasant wasted no time in striking back. The two birds began to dance and spar around that single beam of light, seemingly competing for the best position. We see two streaks of color, one brilliant red and one deep azure, moving in a frantic, beautiful blur. Under that solitary ray of sun, their feathers scattered shimmering points of light across the enclosure like tiny jewels. This enchanting scene was captured by a young woman named Zhang Jinjing, a newcomer to the world of blogging, who posted it online. Her previous videos had barely earned a few likes, so she was stunned when this one suddenly reached 420,000. However, she didn't realize that a supposed friend had downloaded her video and posted it as her own. The friend even went so far as to claim she was the original creator, accusing Jinjing of stealing the footage. In an instant, Jinjing found herself the target of online harassment, with strangers calling her shameless and a thief. Fortunately, that viral video caught the eye of Zhang Qiu, the operations manager for Chang'an Zoo. She immediately recognized that this footage could be incredibly useful for the zoo's promotion. Qiu invited Jinjing to the management office, and after hearing the truth about the theft and the slander, she decided to help. She called in Zhang Wei from the legal department. While it was a clear copyright violation, the situation was a bit complicated. Wei suggested a clever little trap, one he was 80% sure the fraudulent friend would fall right into. If she took the bait, winning the lawsuit would be easy. To be honest, it was a rather brilliant plan. However, Wei pointed out a small technicality. While he could certainly build the case, he was the company's in-house legal counsel. He didn't have the authority to represent outside individuals in court, and Jinjing, unfortunately, wasn't an employee of the zoo. Jinjing immediately asked if the company was hiring, and Qiu told her to wait while she went to ask the boss. When the report from Zhang Wei reached the director, he was genuinely surprised by the turn of events. It finally made sense why his system points had increased by 8 today, even though the number of physical visitors hadn't grown that fast. Jinjing's video had generated massive traffic, and he estimated that her viral post alone contributed 5 or 6 of those points. His total points had now reached 155, earning him a reward of 5 beast spirit pills. Naturally, he wanted to hire Jinjing, so Wei quickly returned to the management hall with a colleague from Human Resources. She was interviewed and hired on the spot, which she was more than happy about, but the surprises didn't end there. The zoo's benefits were unexpectedly generous, and Jing was appointed as a media operator under Tong Anchi's management. Once the employment contract was signed, Wei immediately instructed Jing on exactly how to handle the person who stole her work. Time passed quickly, and as 7 o'clock approached, the final group of tourists began to leave the park grounds. The director sent the staff home early to rest, though the amount of trash left behind today was, frankly, a bit ridiculous. He actually had to enlist the monkeys and the crows to help clean up. Still, the day's ticket revenue reached 2.47 million. However, the zoo was limited by its small size, and it simply couldn't accommodate such a massive influx of visitors. Many people bought tickets but couldn't even get inside. It became clear that the most urgent task was expansion. And so, the next day, we find ourselves traveling to the neighboring Heishui village to address a different kind of problem. Arriving at 9 in the evening, the director and his loyal wolf, Pujuan, had hunted down 23 wild boars by 11. The locals watched the display with their jaws on the floor. Just as they were finishing up, a man from another village arrived. This messenger from Beijidian village rushed over to report the situation to Zhou Yishan, the local official. He claimed that wild boars had also been spotted in their village at night. Not one to refuse a plea for help, the director agreed. He immediately set off for Beijidian village, where he and Pujuan prepared to face the boars on that new stretch of land. They ended up hunting down a total of 41 wild boars, knowing that if they didn't intervene, Beijidian village would likely have suffered devastating losses throughout the night. The director stayed busy from 11 at night until 3:30 in the morning to finish the job. He even let Pujuan exert a bit more strength to ensure no more boars would appear today. The villagers were so grateful they felt the 5,000 yuan fee for the team was far too little. They insisted on stuffing his hands with cured meats and local camellia tea, even though it was nearly dawn. Instead of thinning out, the crowd grew larger, and he found he couldn't leave after finishing the work. The villagers blocked the road, nearly kneeling in prayer, begging him to help their lands too. They pleaded for the tiger to at least let out a roar to scare off the boars that plagued them for years. Feeling a bit soft-hearted, he ended up visiting 4 more villages in quick succession. He had Pujuan let out a mighty roar into the mountains, which, luckily, meant no more actual killing was required. By 6 in the morning, the work was finally done, and he brought Pujuan back to the zoo. Zhou Yishan followed along, and the two of them stopped at a bun shop to grab some breakfast. Yishan thanked him for the hard night's work, offering a toast with tea since it was a bit early for wine. The director laughed it off, telling the official that being called brother by him was far too much praise. He noted that he'd rarely seen a leader willing to run around with farmers all night, so he returned the toast. Yishan was quite moved by the gesture and simply smiled as they both enjoyed their hot tea. The director then took the opportunity to ask about his plans to expand the zoo's territory. He intended to develop toward the north, extending from the current zoo all the way to Emerald Mountain. Since it was all wasteland, he needed to know the procedures, the complexity, and, of course, the price. Yishan sighed, noting that in a city as vast as Yunhai, there truly wasn't such a thing as simple wasteland. The areas the director mentioned were all forestry land, which had always been a strict ecological red line for development. Converting forestry land into commercial use could allow for development, but the resistance would be immense. Most industrial projects cause ecological damage, making the initial approval process incredibly difficult. The director smiled, pointing out that he was running a zoo, not a factory. How could that be destructive? He argued that a zoo had nothing to do with environmental harm. In fact, these rare animals needed that very environment. They required the primitive, ecological setting of the mountains. Yishan froze for a moment, then slapped his own forehead. He realized the director was right. This was a zoo, and he was someone who could manage rare animals perfectly. Who would dare link him to ecological destruction? Besides the trees and rivers, wild animals are the stars of the ecosystem. Selling the land to him wouldn't just be a transaction, it would be a benefit to the environment itself. It would help rare species thrive and multiply, while also providing a creative boost to the local government's finances. Furthermore, it could lead to the development of supporting industries. He asked Yishan to imagine the possibilities. If Qinggan Zoo could host 30 rare animals now, why couldn't it host 300 or even 3,000? Yishan's face flushed with excitement. The only thing the official didn't know was the director's secret confidence. He truly believed he could bring in thousands of rare creatures, and since he said it, he intended to make it happen. If they reached 3,000, then Qinggan Zoo wouldn't be the only thing that changed. The whole city would transform. Yunhai City would develop a unique industry, boosting countless related sectors in the process. Yishan asked if he was truly confident, and the director replied that it depended on Yishan's own confidence. It was a clear invitation for the official to participate deeply in the project. Yishan would handle the bureaucracy, while the director handled the growth on the ground. He wanted expansion, and Yishan wanted results, a powerful alliance. Yishan decided to discuss the matter with Secretary Bai as soon as he returned, urging the director to finish his breakfast. After dropping the director off at the zoo, Yishan headed straight for City Hall, while our director returned to his duties. He approached the pool prepared for the Jingting black tortoise and found a layer of water at the bottom. It didn't look like much. However, this was Lu water, which Hchuan and the ravens had painstakingly collected leaf by leaf deep within the mountains. The sheer effort and difficulty of gathering it were obvious, so he took advantage of the morning quiet before any visitors arrived. He carefully placed the Jingting black tortoise egg into the pool, ensuring it was settled in its new home. He tucked it away behind some natural tree root decorations and instructed Hchuan to personally keep a watchful eye on it. Although the zoo would soon expand and he'd need a much larger pool, for now, this would have to suffice. The priority was simply getting it to hatch. Once the egg was safe, he opened the system to check his progress. His sect reputation had reached 154 points, thanks in part to the wild boar hunt from the previous night. That event had stunned the local villagers and officials, earning him 2 points, while the other 5 points came from elsewhere. These points had grown steadily since yesterday, clearly driven by Zhang Jinjin's video, which was still going viral online. The reward he received this time was called the Jade Tree Prosperity Array, a rather intriguing-sounding prize. This was a unique formation designed for cultivating spiritual matter, granting a specific spiritual advantage to anything grown within it. It seemed the Jade Beast sect likely used this array to grow high-quality food for their avian or herbivorous spiritual beasts. To be honest, it was a very practical tool for a growing menagerie of mystical creatures. He wasn't quite sure how to use it yet, perhaps to grow spiritual grass for the ravens to enjoy. After all, the ravens still had to fly out and forage for their own food every single day. Pondering this, he returned to the management hall at 8 o'clock, finding the place already packed with eager visitors. The excitement was just as intense as the day before, and in what felt like a heartbeat, evening had arrived once again. Once again, we see him heading into the mountains with the South China tiger. In just 2 nights, Huojuan's cultivation had improved significantly. His physical strength had increased by about 60%, making him a truly formidable force of nature. Now he could shatter a wild boar's skull with a single casual swipe, though our director told him to hold back a little. He didn't want to cause unnecessary alarm, so they moved on to the 4th village and worked late into the night. It wasn't until 2 in the morning that they finished, settling the tiger before seeing Taizhan and the team off. He then climbed into the car with Zhou Yishan, who finally had some news regarding the land they had discussed. The city had approved 3,000 acres for 50 years, with a resource usage fee of just 1 single yuan. There was a catch, of course. The zoo's tax rate would be increased by an additional 5%. Furthermore, the built-up area on the land could not exceed 40% to ensure the ecological environment was preserved. 1 yuan? To be honest, he could hardly believe his ears and asked if his friend was joking. Zhou Yishan simply gave a knowing smile and asked if he looked like he was in a joking mood. He laughed heartily, thanking him repeatedly. A little extra tax was a small price to pay for such a deal. Besides, he wouldn't even need 30% of the land for buildings, so the 40% limit was no trouble at all. Since the city was only charging a token fee, the money saved could be funneled directly into the zoo's infrastructure. As anyone who has ever managed a project knows, the construction is always the most expensive part. Early the next morning, he arrived at City Hall with Zhang Wei to finalize the paperwork. They signed the agreement for the 3,000 acres, and he officially paid the 1 yuan resource fee. As he and Zhang Wei walked out of the building with the contract, a system notification flashed before his eyes. For expanding the territory of the Yunsho sect, his reputation increased by 30 points, bringing the total to 184. He was rewarded with a year's worth of cultivation and a new technique called the small city formation. Having obtained the blueprints for the Xuanyu Pavilion, he stretched his arms out wide in pure satisfaction. It felt as though every single pore on his body was opening up at once. Spiritual energy surged into him like 100 rivers returning to the sea, finally pushing him into the late stage of qi refining. He felt his inner core instantly expand from a small pond into a vast, shimmering lake. With his spiritual energy now flowing with endless momentum, he immediately turned his attention to the other 2 rewards. First was the small city formation, a technique that allowed him to condense spiritual energy into a protective array. The formation's effectiveness was slightly increased, and then there was the blueprint for the Yunsho sect's Xuanyu Pavilion. Any structure built according to this design would receive a mystical blessing, making it virtually unbreakable. Furthermore, it would boost the breeding and vitality of non-avian spiritual beasts, quite a useful bonus, to be honest. The blueprint itself was an ancient parchment painting, depicting a massive structure made of coiled wood and giant stones. His interest was piqued immediately. After all, if he wanted to build the world's #1 zoo, he couldn't settle for average. The appearance of the Xuanyu Pavilion was incredibly striking and far from ordinary. Since it offered special effects upon completion, he decided to theme the entire zoo around the Yunsho sect. His gaze then fell upon 6 characters inscribed on the giant stone. Qinggan Sect Xuanyu Pavilion. He wondered if the original Yunsho sect from the cultivation world was also known as the Qinggan sect. Qinggan, to secure the fate of the world. Now that certainly sounded like a righteous and noble sect. A little later, he received a call from Zhou Yishan, who told him that people from the Dongling City Breeding Center were asking questions. They had petitioned the city to take his tiger, though the city officials had already declined the request on his behalf. However, the director of the breeding center was now coming in person. Apparently, they had a specific reason for wanting the tiger. It turned out their female tigers weren't conceiving, as they only had one male tiger for 3 females. Upon hearing about so many female tigers, he told Joey Sean not to stop them and to let them come over immediately. He hung up the phone and then reached out to Professor Ning to share some news. He informed him that the red-bellied and white-bellied pheasants were experiencing a rather miraculous situation by 1 in the afternoon. Professor Ning had arrived at the zoo and was carefully observing the 2 types of pheasants. The professor was instantly struck with awe, noting that they were simply too beautiful for words. He remembered clearly that they hadn't looked like this just 2 days ago, which left the poor old man quite flustered. Kai told him not to worry and suggested they head to the 2nd floor for some tea while the professor processed everything. He promised to explain the feeding situation from the past few days, shortly before 2 o'clock, as they sat upstairs. Zhou Yishan arrived at the Chang'an Zoo accompanying Director Song from the Dongling South China Tiger Breeding Center and his team. Zhou Yishan stepped forward to introduce the 2 parties, addressing our protagonist as Mr. Kai. He introduced the visitor as Song Shuanghu, the director of the breeding center, a name that certainly carried some weight. Kai wondered if the man intended to give him 2 tigers, struggling to suppress a smile at the thought. He welcomed them warmly, claiming he had been looking forward to their visit for a long time and invited them inside. Director Song and his team of experts were quite surprised by this reception, to say the least. This boss Kai wasn't nearly as difficult as they had imagined, though Zhou Yishan was busy biting his lip to keep quiet. You see, Zhou had come to know Kai very well. When he became suddenly enthusiastic, there were only 2 possibilities. Either he genuinely liked someone and wanted to be friends, or he was planning to scheme against them. Sure enough, as they entered the zoo, they ran straight into Professor Ning, prompting Song Shuanghu to hurry forward. He greeted the professor with great surprise, wondering aloud what he was doing there at the zoo. Professor Ning laughed and asked if Little Song had also come to see the rare animals, which the director quickly confirmed. We returned to the group, where Song explained they were also there to see the rare animals and, perhaps, handle a small matter. He mentioned wanting to check on the injured South China tiger, which Professor Ning agreed was a very sensible idea. The professor noted that Song's breeding center had only seen 1 cub born in the last 2 years, a rather poor record. Furthermore, that cub's health was quite fragile. Song sighed, admitting that this was exactly why they had come. He turned to Professor Ning, calling him a great authority and pleading for his help in saying a few words on their behalf. Their biggest headache at the moment, it seemed, was that their own tigers were simply unable to conceive. Since the South China tiger here happened to be a healthy male, he wondered if they could borrow him for a while. Director Song looked at Kai with an embarrassed expression, but our protagonist simply clapped his hands in delight. He told them they had arrived at the perfect time, as he'd noticed the tiger acting strange. Clearly, it was in heat. Since he didn't have any female tigers, and the director had plenty, he insisted they take the animal away immediately. He joked that the tiger ate so much he could hardly afford to keep it, which left Director Song absolutely overjoyed. The man never expected things to go so smoothly, praising Boss Kai for being such a generous and noble soul. With the director grinning from ear to ear, Kai led the group to load the tiger onto the transport vehicle right then and there. Professor Ning pulled him aside, asking if this tiger wasn't supposed to be the crown jewel of his entire zoo. He warned that if they borrowed it, it might be like the famous story of a loan that is never actually returned. Kai laughed it off, asking the professor if he really thought he lacked such a grand vision for the future. Professor Ning could only chuckle in response. Before leaving, Director Song turned back and cupped his hands in a respectful salute. He thanked both Boss Kai for his righteousness and Professor Ning for his presence, preparing to head back to the center. He promised to settle the tiger in first and pledged to notify them both the very moment there was any good news. Kai smiled warmly, telling Director Song that, to be perfectly honest, having that tiger stay even 1 more day was a burden. Kai admitted he had been living in constant fear, especially since the tiger had suffered from seizures before, and he simply couldn't bear the responsibility. He added that now that the tiger was out the door, it was their responsibility, and he finally felt a great weight lifted from his shoulders. Director Song was taken aback to hear the tiger had seizures, but Professor Ning confirmed he had seen it with his own eyes. It was something similar to an epileptic fit, and to be honest, they still hadn't managed to identify the underlying cause. There were even rumors that the zoo had a strange magnetic field causing the animal to collapse in such a way. Whether it would continue to seize once away from that field was anyone's guess, though fortunately, the episodes weren't frequent. Kai warned them to be careful, and just as the transport vehicle passed through the zoo's main gates, the inevitable happened. With a sudden thud, the tiger collapsed to the floor of the cage and began to twitch violently, letting out a low roar. Professor Ning's eyes widened in shock as he pointed at the animal, while the surrounding tourists began to panic at the sight. In an instant, screams erupted from the crowd, and the men responsible for pushing the transport cart reacted in a rather peculiar way. They immediately threw their hands high above their heads, looking for all the world as if they were declaring their total innocence. Zhou Yishan bit his lip hard, thinking how this same trick had been used to deceive people 3 times now, a true masterclass in mischief. By now, he was 10,000% certain that Kai was somehow controlling this South China, Oscar-winning tiger. Yishan looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle, desperately trying to recall every sad memory of his life just to keep from laughing. Meanwhile, Director Song was so terrified that his legs refused to obey him. The timing of the incident couldn't have been worse. Kai had only just finished saying that once the tiger left the gate, it was no longer his problem, which was quite convenient, really. The responsibility now rested solely on Director Song, and with Professor Ning there as a witness, the stakes were incredibly high. If something went wrong now, Song knew he'd never be able to clear his name, so he frantically ordered them to pull the tiger back inside. He shouted for the emergency medical equipment to be brought out immediately while the workers scrambled to obey his commands. The men quickly pulled the transport vehicle back through the zoo's main gates, and the moment the tiger crossed the threshold, the tiger suddenly sat straight up, casually licking its paws and the corners of its mouth before letting out a long yawn. It was as if nothing had happened at all, leaving Director Song standing there in a daze, completely bewildered by the sudden recovery. He tilted his head, staring at the tiger in disbelief. It seemed the beast only suffered when leaving and cured itself the moment it returned. Kai quickly stepped in to offer some encouragement, suggesting that Director Song try again, as this was surely just a one-time coincidence. He insisted the tiger rarely had these fits, and that one episode usually meant a long period of stability, perfect for the trip to the center. At that moment, Song finally understood why Kai had been so eager to hand over the animal. It was like getting rid of a plague. It seemed the tiger really did have some sort of lingering condition that, for whatever reason, flared up the moment it left the zoo's grounds. Song realized that with such a defect, he couldn't possibly take it back. This wasn't just a tiger, it was a ticking time bomb. He turned to Professor Ning, claiming he truly had no idea the animal was so dependent on the local environment to stay stable. Since the tiger clearly couldn't leave, he declared they simply couldn't take it away. It was far too risky to proceed now. Kai's tone shifted as he asked Director Song if he was joking, reminding him how violent a tiger in heat could become. He argued that without a mate, the tiger's agitation would only cause more seizures, and refusing to take it was like sentencing it to death. Kai dropped the pleasantries and snapped at Song, making it clear that if the tiger died on his watch, the responsibility would be Song's alone. Director Song had likely never been spoken to this way, especially not by a young zoo owner pointing a finger right at his face. He stood there with his neck stiff, unable to find the words to argue, until Kai suddenly softened his tone for the next move. Kai suggested a compromise. The center needed this tiger, so they should take it, and he promised the animal wouldn't die. He proposed that if Song was afraid of the risk, he could simply return the tiger once the mating was finished. The ultimate responsibility would remain with Kai, which seemed like a fair deal for an animal expert who surely couldn't just stand by. Director Song found himself backed into a corner, with Kai repeatedly hammering home the weight of his professional duty. It made it seem as though the only reason Song would refuse was out of cowardice, which, to be honest, was exactly the case. But Kai realized that pushing too hard with this mix of pressure and persuasion might backfire. His intentions were becoming far too obvious, making it seem as though the tiger had suffered even worse episodes. It looked like he was just desperate to get rid of it, which made Director Song hesitate and reconsider his position. Song insisted that Professor Ning was right. It wasn't just about responsibility, but about being truly accountable. He argued they couldn't let the tiger leave this specific environment, prompting Kai to ask what else could be done. Kai asked if the tiger should just stay a bachelor forever, despite being perfectly capable of helping the species survive. As Kai questioned if the beast should just rot in its cage, Director Song suddenly felt a very ominous premonition. Professor Ning then suggested that perhaps Song's team could simply bring the female tigers here instead. Nearby, Zhou Yishan was struggling to hide his laughter while Kai took a deep breath and nodded in agreement. He noted that the location didn't matter, as long as the tigers could successfully breed and produce offspring. Kai turned to Director Song for his opinion, though Song felt like he had no real say in the matter anymore. To be honest, there weren't many options left unless he wanted to claim the professor's idea was a bad one. He could either risk taking the sick tiger away or refuse to bring the females here and look like a fool. Admitting he only cared about the breeding happening at his own center would expose his true selfish motives. Trapped in a corner, Song finally stammered out that they could perhaps give this new plan a try. Kai then held up 2 fingers, mentioning he had heard the center had 3 female tigers available. Since 2 of them were struggling to conceive, he suggested bringing both over at once to save everyone the trip. Deep down, Kai was only holding back from asking for all 3 because he didn't want to push Song over the edge. After all, he had 3 special pills ready, and it would be a shame to let any of them go to waste. Director Song's head began to throb as he wondered how a small-time zoo owner knew so much about his center. Director Song wondered why on earth anyone would bother to investigate exactly how many female tigers at his center were struggling to conceive. It was clear that the young man was no longer hiding his hand, and Song stared at Kai in utter shock. He couldn't help but wonder if Professor Ning was helping Kai plot against him, or if even the tiger was in on the scheme. The whole situation felt like a fever dream, yet he had no choice but to nod his head in dejected agreement. He knew that if he dared to refuse or failed to cooperate with sending the tigers over, a single word from Professor Ning would be enough. That one word could see him kicked out of his position immediately, so he prepared to return the tiger to its enclosure. As Director Song and his team slunk away in defeat, we see Kai invite Zhou Yishan and Professor Ning up to the second floor. The moment they arrived, the professor pointed a finger at Kai and turned to address Zhou Yishan with a wry smile. He remarked that in his 60-plus years of life, this was the very first time he had allowed himself to be used as someone else's weapon. Kai's eye twitched as he realized the old man had seen through him all along, though he tried to play it off with a sheepish laugh. To be honest, he wasn't the first to be outmaneuvered by Kai, and by 6:30 that evening, the zoo had officially closed for the day. It was then that the breeding center finally delivered the 2 female tigers that had been promised. Director Song didn't even show his face this time, and we noticed these 2 females were significantly smaller than the mighty Pujuan. The 2 tigers were initially restless, growling and pacing inside their transport crates, but the moment they laid eyes on Pujuan, they froze. Suddenly, all the aggression vanished, and as soon as the females were released into the enclosure, they became remarkably docile. They affectionately threw themselves at Pujuan's feet, rubbing their heads against his massive paws in a display of submission. Pujuan lowered his head to catch their scent before standing up to take a slow, regal stroll around his territory. The 2 females followed him instantly, staying by his side and acting quite charming to get his attention. Kai clapped his hands and told the staff it was time to leave, suggesting they shouldn't interrupt the tiger's private business. The accompanying workers finally relaxed, simply asking Boss Kai to ensure the animals were well cared for in their new home. The staff pleaded with Kai to review the feeding records and study the tiger's habits, and he politely saw them off with a respectful gesture. Rest assured, everyone, he told them, as the researchers shared a tearful farewell with their beloved animals. After they left, Kai jogged back to the tiger enclosure and used the divine stone to call out to Pujuan. He told the tiger to wait a moment and not rush things, to which Pujuan replied that he was simply enjoying his new imperial lifestyle. Seeing the tiger flanked by his 2 new companions, Kai laughed and asked if he was satisfied, earning a grateful response from Pujuan. Kai noted that satisfaction wasn't enough. Pujuan needed to exercise some self-control, and he produced a specialized pill for the tiger. He explained that in an hour, Pujuan should only mate with one of them, as he tossed a single yin pill through the window. Pujuan lunged forward and swallowed it in one gulp, as Kai explained the pill would ensure he could produce offspring. However, since the effect was temporary, he had to choose only one mate for today and save his energy for the next. He promised a second pill for tomorrow, and after Pujuan signaled his understanding, Kai turned his attention to the 2 smaller female tigers. He took out a beast spirit pill, split it in half, and tossed the pieces to the females as a welcoming gift. He told them that if they behaved, there would be more benefits in the future, and the 2 tigers scrambled to devour the fragments. To be honest, they would need the strength, as they were expected to handle Pujuan's wild nature and eventually raise his cubs. As night fell, Kai set out with his blood tigers to clear the wild boars from the final remaining village. After 4 or 5 days of hard work, the boar population had dwindled significantly, and by 10 o'clock that evening, the task was nearly done. He had already culled 17 boars and managed to capture 4 others alive, 2 males and 2 females. When Zhou Yishan asked why he was bothering to catch them, Kai simply claimed his zoo was understaffed and needed more variety. It was a bit of an excuse, of course, but with that, the wild boar disaster was officially considered resolved. At 11:30, they finished for the night, and Kai drove a transport truck while the rescue center driver followed behind. They returned to the zoo with the 4 boars securely tied up, marking the end of a very long and productive day. After returning the tigers to their enclosure, Kai got back behind the wheel of the truck carrying the wild boars. He planned to put the boars to work on the summit of Mount Fuguang, using them to turn the soil for a new tea plantation. By the time he finally made it back to the zoo, it was already 6:30 in the morning. Suddenly, Huan sent a message through the divine stone. The Jingting black tortoise had finally hatched. Without wasting a second, Kai ran to the circular pool at top speed and peered eagerly into the water. The sky was still dim at this hour, and we see a tiny turtle crawling slowly along the bottom of the pool. To his amazement, this little turtle was carrying a translucent, golden jade shell upon its back. A brilliant golden light radiated outward like a projection, cutting through the murky morning shadows. It actually projected the image of an ancient, elegant courtyard onto the surface of the water. It was as if the entire pool had been transformed into a living, breathing painting, leaving Kai completely breathless. As the little turtle moved, every time its tiny legs touched the ground, a faint golden ripple would expand outward, making it look as though it were walking on air. It seemed to be strolling through an otherworldly courtyard that only appeared when its feet touched the earth. Kai reached out his hand. A surge of spiritual energy flowed out, intertwining with the essence of the Jingting black tortoise. The contract was completed in an instant, and he felt a mysterious domain of the divine stone suddenly expand around him. Natural spirit beasts truly are in a league of their own, as the ability this tortoise granted him was quite extraordinary. It was a domain, a field with a 5-meter radius. Within this specific space, his divine sense became omnipresent, even with his eyes closed or behind a thick wall. He could perceive every single corner. As he and the tortoise grew stronger together, the range and functions of this domain would continue to expand. "Little turtle," he called out through his mind. The black tortoise didn't react at all, and Kai suddenly realized that this little fellow was quite different from spirit beasts like Wensi. Having just been born, it lacked any experience or knowledge. It likely didn't even realize it was capable of making a sound. He took out his last spirit awakening pill along with a spirit receiving pill and tossed them both into the water. Wensi, who was perched on a branch above, watched this scene unfold and let out a sudden, mischievous hoot. "Little turtle," the bird seemed to mock. "It looks like you're about to have your language pack installed." Soon after, a voice echoed through the divine stone saying, "Oh ho ho, master," leaving Kai looking completely bewildered. He immediately shot a glare at Wensi. After all, this little tortoise was essentially a newborn with a blank slate. It had no understanding of the world yet, and taking the spirit awakening pill was meant to be a delicate process. It was supposed to be a forced installation of a language pack, where the creature receives cognition through the soul contract. But its way of expressing itself wasn't mature yet, and Wensi's interruption was effectively like brainwashing the poor thing. "Little turtle, from now on your name shall be Ching Tongzi." "Oh ho ho," Kai declared, trying to steer the situation. "What a great name," Ching Tongzi's tender voice replied, which honestly made Kai feel a bit of a headache coming on. Seeing this, Wensi flapped his wings and flew away at top speed, while Kai took a deep, steadying breath. His spiritual power expanded instantly, connecting with the Taiha Garden Jade that covered the entire zoo. We see the entire formation of the Taiha Garden Jade begin to glow with a soft, ethereal light. Invisible threads of energy gathered together, forming a miniature version of the Great Garden's formation map. He lowered his hand slowly, guiding the shimmering, condensed formation down into the water. It settled gently onto Ching Tongzi's back, and a soft sound of resonance echoed through the air. The space within the zoo trembled slightly as the Great Taiha formation flashed with a brilliant golden light. All the animals were startled awake, emerging from their dens to look around in a state of quiet wonder. Suddenly, every animal grew excited as the Taiha Garden Jade began to pulse with newfound power. Its effectiveness was now 10 times stronger than before, filling the zoo with a massive surge of life force. This energy soothed the animals' anxieties, ensuring that every breath they took was brimming with vitality. It was as if their bodies were absorbing the very essence of heaven and earth, and for any human standing nearby, the effect was much the same, leaving them feeling refreshed with a perfectly clear mind. With every breath, one could easily regulate their emotions and release stress, which was lucky, as Kai had been awake all night. Feeling truly exhausted, he returned to his bedroom to rest. However, once 8 o'clock arrived, the outside world grew noisy as the first wave of tourists began pouring into the zoo. In his dazed state, he heard a knock at the door. Using his Jingting domain, he sensed immediately that it was Luo Jin. She pushed the door open, looking somewhat puzzled. "Young master," she said, "there is a foreigner outside who says he has something very important to discuss with you."